And here I am. 2 years after my depressing affair, a year and a half after my divorce, 1 year of therapy, 22 words into writing my story, and I think I have writer's block. I told Dr. Thompson that I'm not a writer by nature, but he insisted. His idea, minus the psychiatric nonsense, is that by telling my life story, I can find a way to move it forward. Like my life is a fairy tale. As if I'm just a character. As if by writing about the worst mistake I've ever made, I can write myself a happy ending. Seems like bullshit to me, but Thompson is the one with the PhD and a 4.8 rating on Google reviews, and I'm the one who hired him, so I guess I should give him everything I've got. That said, there's no way in hell anyone will see this, including the good doctor. It's one thing to admit your ugliness and cruelty to yourself, usually at 1 o'clock in the morning, with a glass of white in your hand and 3 more in your stomach. But it's quite another to lance that wound in a beige room with Mondrian prints on the wall and a guy who looks like William H. Macy sitting across from you. Macy sitting across from you. This story is not about the proud moments of my life. It's about dark days, stupid decisions, and regrets. A lot of regrets. As for my happy ending, forget about it. Clarity won't change the past, and it won't change what my life is now. For some mistakes, there is no going back to the way things were, no release from the oxen. There is only honesty, regret, and, hopefully, understanding. At least, that's what I'm praying for. Because I desperately want to know why. Next chapter. The thing is, I have a quirk. Or rather, not a condition. More like a bit of a problem. I love cleanliness. When I was a kid, it was a problem. I grew up in a house full of boys, so for as long as I can remember, I was surrounded by dirt. Dirty dishes, dirty clothes, dirty sports equipment and football cleats strewn all over the house. My parents cleaned up as best they could, and as I got older, I helped too. But as fast as we cleaned up, my brothers cleaned up even faster. My parents threatened and punished, but even I knew they were soft-pedaling. I think my brothers tried to clean up after themselves, but it was always, I'll just leave my mitten here for a minute, or I swear I'll clean my shoes later. With 4 boys, a few minutes here, and a few minutes later there turned the living room into a living room that looked like a city dump. Because of my cleanliness issues and my brother's dirt issues, I was effectively banished from the living room, kitchen, and any other room the boys occupied. Fortunately, there was one place in the house where I could always hide from the mess: my bedroom. But I wasn't entirely comfortable there either. My mom, excited about finally having a daughter, had decorated it in her version of the perfect little girl's room: pink 4-poster bed, lampshades, lace curtains, and ornate provincial-style furniture. For me, it was a different kind of clutter, a slightly more acceptable form of clutter. Needless to say, I was not a fan of it. I longed for clean lines, barren surfaces, neutral shades. When I turned 9, the official age for choosing bedroom furniture in the Collins household, I devised a plan to transform my mom's girly gulag into my ideal fortress of solitude. The first step was a trip to IKEA. Oh, IKEA. This is where I wish I was a better writer. I wish I had words to express the joy I feel when I walk into IKEA. I am reminded of a quote by Alex DeLarge. Oh, bliss, bliss and paradise. Oh, it was splendor and luxury in the flesh. It was like a bird of the rarest celestial metal or silver wine flowing in a spaceship. Gravity is all nonsense now. When I floated, I imagined such beautiful pictures. Of course, Alex was a fictional gangster musing about Beethoven, and I was a disgraced divorcee musing about Swedish furniture, but the spirit is the same. I'm sure I don't have a drop of Scandinavian blood in me, but my little teenage heart was beating with delight as I strolled through the store's perfect little bedrooms, each meticulously furnished with the perfect amount of minimalist furniture. Everywhere I looked, there were straight lines and uncluttered spaces. Honestly, IKEA still makes my heart race. I spent most of the month leading up to my birthday drooling over the IKEA website, so before we even got in the car, I had already picked everything out. An hour after we went into the store, my parents and I walked out of there with a Billy bookcase, a perfect little Einol desk, and a retentive bed with drawers for all my toys and art supplies. In the basket, we also found a set of pre-vert panel blinds and an interrogator LED table lamp. A few hours of banging, screwing, and swearing, and my bedroom was ready. Looking at her, my eyes filled with light and my vision blurred. It was perfect. My father and I had created an oasis, a place of spotless surfaces and bright lighting, pastel colors, and industrial low-pile carpet. Everything is clean, everything in its place. I finally have the sanctuary I've been dreaming of. Of course, like any other sanctuary, there were uninvited guests waiting outside the gates. In my case, the barbarian horde consisted of my brothers, Ethan, Logan, Brendan, and Liam. I took precautions. I made the requisite "no boys allowed" sign on my door. To prove I was serious, I ditched the traditional pink color and printed it in a blood-red font with white Arial bold letters in 36-point size. And just in case they still think I'm kidding, I also signed it "I'm serious" in 14-point script MT bold letters at the bottom. It seemed to work. The barbarians stayed out of my room most of the time. There wasn't much of interest there for a teenage boy, and I'm sure the intrusive odor and the persistent odor of antiseptic spray upset their delicate sensibilities. When Brendan said my bedroom looked like an operating room, I nearly cried with gratitude. It was one of the few times with my brothers that I felt seen. In retrospect, I don't think he meant it as a compliment. Ethan, my older brother, was the first invader to break through the gate. His attack was caused by a pretty bad oral fixation. He had it pretty bad. It later developed into a pretty serious smoking habit. But at 15, he limited himself to chewing on things he found around the house. Things like pencil tips, pink erasers, and my Barbies. And apparently, chewing on my Barbies while watching reruns of Friends was just the thing to help Ethan relax after a long day of school and football practice. I discovered this habit of Ethan's when I tried to put on a pair of particularly cute Louboutin slip-on shoes on my endless summer Barbie, but they fell off time after time. Upon closer inspection, I discovered that Endless Summer no longer has toes. Before we go any further, a quick note about Barbie. Colombian musician Kali Uchis once said, "I'm not a Barbie doll. I'm just a multi-dimensional human being who likes to create things." I believe Kali Uchis can go screw herself. I know. Knee-jerk feminists tell us that Barbie is a terrible role model for little girls, causing them all sorts of eating disorders, high heel addiction, and obsession with RuPaul's Drag Race show. I respectfully disagree. Barbie is an underrated feminist icon. She's been a lawyer and a judge, a firefighter and a police officer, an astronaut and a president. She can do any job, overcome any challenge. And no matter what she does, she always has the right closet, tailored to her, admittedly. Unconventional body type. Every accessory is perfectly suited to her style, perfectly tailored to her figure, perfectly adapted to her needs. She is the toy of all toys, and despite her unhealthy obsession with the color pink, she is the perfect role model for any little girl and any aspiring drag queen. I still dream of Barbie's life, and I'm almost 30 years old now. When I discovered Barbie's legs were messed up, I ran to my mom, who yelled at Ethan, who pouted and resented me. Nothing happened for a few days, and then there was the stewardess dream Barbie with teeth marks on her toes. It all happened again, only now all four of my brothers were laughing at me for being a jabberwock. By the time Moondream Barbie's feet were in Ethan's mouth, I realized that whining to mom wasn't going to help, and I took it to the next level. I went to my dad's office. I walked into dad's office, the dejected gait I portrayed whenever I wanted my parents to know I was really upset. Dad, immersed in his computer, waved me over and sat me down in a comfortable chair at the other end of the room, completely oblivious to my Oscar-winning performance. While Dad finished his work, I looked around. The office wasn't as clean and organized as my room. There were knickknacks on the bookshelves and a few stray stickers stuck to the desk. But underneath the cozy, lived-in atmosphere, I discerned a well-thought-out scheme. Everything my dad needed was at his fingertips. Printer next to paper, paper next to pens, pens next to him. I would have been a little harder on eliminating clutter, but I respected planning and organization. "Hey, Pumpkin," he said, finally looking up. Then he caught my facial expression, especially my lower lip, which bulged out enough to deserve its own zip code. "Hey, what's that?" I'd been holding back for a long time, so it all came out. "It's Ethan, Daddy. He keeps eating Barbie's toes." Dad's face turned red, and his mouth slammed shut. Seeing his expression, I felt vindicated. He, like me, was clearly stunned by the cruelty my dolls had been subjected to. Emboldened, I continued. "What should I do, Dad? Barbie's shoes keep falling off." Dad bit his lip and his eyes seemed to be watering. I felt a wave of kinship. Daddy understood. He hiccuped, said something inarticulately comforting, and hugged me. I could feel him trembling. I'd barely had time to tell him about Ethan's abuse of Barbie, and he was already crying. After holding me in his arms for about a minute longer, he pulled away and looked at me, his cheeks flushed and his eyes filled with unshed tears. He sighed and smiled softly at me. "What do you want to do about it, sweetheart?" "I want Ethan to stop, Daddy. And I want to fix my Barbie's toes." Daddy nodded. "Well, fixing your Barbies isn't that hard. Just bring them to me tonight, and I'll see what I can do." Then his expression turned serious. "Fixing Ethan, on the other hand, might be a little more difficult. I assume you've already talked to your mom about it." I nodded. "And what did she say?" I folded my arms across my chest. "She yelled at Ethan. Then he did it again, and I told Mom, and she yelled at him again, and he did it again." He leaned back in his chair. "Sounds like the truth to me. Your brothers are a bit stubborn." He sighed. "And I guess you figured she'd probably talk to him, he'd probably apologize, and then it would start all over again?" I nodded again. Dad looked thoughtful, then leaned over to me. "Pumpkin, have you ever heard the saying that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results?" I shook my head. "Albert Einstein said that. He was a very smart guy. I bet you can guess what that means, can't you?" "I guess it means that if something doesn't work, you shouldn't keep doing it?" He stroked my head. "That's exactly what it means, kiddo. So if Mommy tells Ethan to stop, it won't make him stop, right?" He smiled at me, and I felt warmly happy. I loved it when Daddy talked to me like an adult, asking me questions and really listening to my answers. It made me feel important and in control. "I'm sorry, Pumpkin, but there's not much I can do that your mom hasn't done. We can punish Ethan. In fact, I'm sure he'll pay for your next batch of Barbies, but he'll probably continue to chew on Barbie's fingers." My brother's taunts of crybaby finished me off, and I didn't want to whine, at least not in front of Daddy, but the injustice was stronger than I could hold in. "But it's not fair." Dad sighed. "No, it's not fair. Sometimes things aren't fair." He paused for a moment and looked at me as if he were measuring me, deciding if I was ready for the harsh truth. I sat up straighter and looked him in the eye. "Honey, look on the bright side," he said. "If yelling at Ethan doesn't work and punishment doesn't work, then you have to find something that will work. How did Ethan find your Barbies?" "I left them in the TV room." His mouth pressed into a straight line. "So, let's get this straight. Ethan was in the TV room, probably watching CSI or something." "Friends." He nodded. "Okay, Friends. So he's watching Friends and sees your Barbie on the floor. Being in a chewing mood, he decides to pick her up and try her toes. Seems about right?" I felt my face frown. "Yeah." Dad rubbed his chin. "And what if Barbie hadn't been on the floor? What do you think he would have done then?" I blinked. I I don't know. Maybe he would have found something else to chew on?" He smiled slightly. "I think so too." He pulled me up onto his lap and hugged me. "Look, I know it's awful that your brother is ruining your Barbies, and it's even more awful that you have to find a way to fix the problem yourself. But now is the time to learn something important. Sometimes you're the one who has to solve the problems that are bothering you. So what are you going to do? Take out my Barbies? He nodded. Maybe make a special place for them? He smiled at me like I was a genius. That sounds like a good idea. Maybe one of the drawers in your new bed could be a Barbie drawer? I nodded. The idea was pretty appealing. Truth be told, I was into Barbie because of the accessories. She had all of them. And I could easily envision turning one of my drawers into the perfect post-apocalyptic style Barbie closet slash stash slash fashion bunker. I was already envisioning rows of Tupperware containers, each filled with different clothing items, beauty products, or accessories. How would I organize them by color? By size? By number of items? My head was spinning with the possibilities that were opening up. I smiled at my dad. Thank you, Daddy. I'll go check it out right away. Anytime, Pumpkin. 2 days later, I had all the new Barbies Ethan had paid for. Each one had a full set of toes, and they lay in their hideout in neat rows, like perfect little soldiers dozing in their molded plastic sarcophagi. And, as I had envisioned, their accessories were stacked in stacks of matching plastic containers, from IKEA, that I mostly arranged by size, though I occasionally changed them by purpose. And sometimes by color, too. Everything was perfect. At least until a week later, when I discovered Barbie Malibu Dream without half of her legs on the TV room floor. I froze. What had happened? Had I left her unattended? Had I failed to protect my Barbie from the barbarian at the gate? I ran to my room. It looked pretty much the same, but I noticed that Barbie's crate was open and the sheet was pulled up. My face grew warm. There was no way I was going to let the sheet get caught like that. My hands clenched into fists. Ethan had tracked her down. I remembered my conversation with my father. Fighting wasn't going to help me. Neither would getting Ethan to pay for new dolls. My Barbie bunker was empty. Clearly, it was time to take matters into my own hands. Finding a new hiding place was easy. I constructed a box for my girls and hid it in a shoe rack in my closet. For a second, I wondered why Anne Frank's Barbie wasn't here, but then I dismissed it. Her clothes were too boring. My Barbies were safe in their new sanctuary, but Ethan still needed punishment. It wasn't even about Malibu Dream Barbies anymore. There was one place in the house where I was safe from the noise and mess of my brothers. One place where I could shut out the rest of the world. One place where I felt safe. And Ethan invaded it, stole from it, ruined my bed. And now he had to pay. Ethan was 6 years older than me, weighed twice as much as me, and was at least a foot taller, so beating him was out of the question. Getting revenge took strategy, not strength. Brains, not brawn. Determination, not teeth. And if it was truly effective, Ethan must never find out it was me. My mind was spinning with the thought of what his revenge on me might be. Maybe he'd go after my fingers. It took a few weeks, but I finally came up with a plan. Ethan had football practice every afternoon and most Saturdays. He would come home tired, throw his sweaty jersey, stinky cleats, and dirty pads in the living room, and then stagger to the kids' bathroom where he would shower and dry himself off with his towel, a black sheet that hung outside the bathroom door. 2 weeks after Malibu Dream Barbie lost her toes, I headed to the bathroom at 5 o'clock, about a half hour before Ethan usually got home from practice. But this time, instead of toilet paper, I used Ethan's towel. And I wiped myself thoroughly. By the time Ethan finished screaming, half the family was in the bathroom and the other half in the hallway. He was crying and still wiping the brown streaks on his face with the towel, which only made them worse. Dad led Logan and Brendan out into the hallway while Mom whispered to him and tried to take the towel away. Dad closed the door. My parents never figured out which one of us did it. We were all suspects. As the oldest child, Ethan ruled with an iron fist, and I wasn't the only one struggling under his not-so-friendly dictatorship. We all had motive and opportunity. Unable to find a better solution, Mom and Dad resorted to the standard, "You're in trouble now" punishment of the highest order. They sent us all to bed early and told us there would be no dessert this week. In retrospect, I'm not surprised my brothers didn't think twice about trashing the house. My parents were really bad at discipline. That night, lying in bed, I felt I had my revenge, and I had gotten away with it. I remembered Ethan's sobs and smiled. Who was a crybaby now? Over the next week, both of my parents apologized to me for the punishment. They knew, of course, that there was no way their little princess could have pulled such a cruel prank on my brother, but they needed to be fair, and they punished me along with my siblings. I assured them I understood and stoically accepted my punishment, trying hard not to smirk at my brother's complaints about the missing desserts. For one thing, my revenge was futile. Streaks of shit on Ethan's face weren't going to get Barbie back on his feet or make him stop chewing on my dolls. He'll still do things that piss me off, and if I'm not vigilant, he might even destroy another one of my dolls. He will always be stronger. He'll always have cooler toys. But on this one night, everything was fair. The scales were even. I was in charge. Over time, that feeling passed, but I still felt a slight thrill every time I saw Ethan's new white towel. But over the next few years, my brothers would periodically break into my room, and I would always retaliate. Sometimes textbooks would go missing the night before a vital exam, or toothbrushes would taste oddly like toilet bowl cleaner. Balancing the scales of justice was exciting, but also scary. I loved the creative, evil ideas that crept into my brain, but the more I indulged them, the more they pushed me around. I realized that if I didn't watch out for them, these little pranks could be the first steps on the road to becoming a monster. I wondered if that's how Jeffrey Dahmer felt when he first skinned a cat. Next chapter. In college, it was easier to ignore my brilliant ideas of revenge. To begin with, I was busy. The economics program was rigorous, and I was one of the only girls, so I felt obligated to kick ass in my classes. Besides, the environment was much simpler. While the girls in my dorm weren't going to win any cleanliness awards, there's a difference between 4 dirty brothers and 28 girls who were still honing their cleaning routines. But after Christmas break my freshman year, I became a kinder, gentler person. My roommate Holly Elkins, frustrated by her boyfriend's absence, dropped out and was replaced by Danielle. Call me Danny. Steinberg. Danny was the classic simpering hippie girl, both in personality and overall body shape. But inside, I discovered, lurked a mean girl. Danny was messy in just about every way in which one can be messy. Within a week, her clothes were strewn across every flat surface in our dorm room, making it impossible to find her textbooks, paper, pens, calculator, all the things she needed to be a real student. That meant she was borrowing mine. Basically, Danny thought that everything that belonged to me was ours, and everything that belonged to her was flooring. God knows I tried to get along with her. Opening the door to the mess, I pulled a smile on my face and started packing. After a couple weeks of this routine, I began to feel like an otter I saw once at the zoo. The water in his enclosure was warm and murky, and he was compulsively swirling around in it, desperately trying to clean himself. Watching him, I felt a kinship. I realized he was going crazy, swirling around trying to wash himself clean, even as fresh mud clogged his fur. Life with Danny was like that. Only, unlike the otter, I had a little evil part of my mind coming up with dozens, no, hundreds, devilish ideas for revenge. It was like I had a superpower that I constantly had to shut down so no one would see. I started to think of it as a voice. My little voice of revenge, always ready to offer advice on how to balance the scales of justice. By the end of January, Danny and I had divided the room in half. On one side was a clothes dryer, and on the other was clean enough for surgery. Then the sarcastic comments began. Anyone who has ever lived in a sorority house can attest to the little things. The eye rolling, the remark about the roommate cleaning again. Soon, we were practically a meme on the floor. Mary Danny and Crazy Ashley. And when I complained about a missing notebook or a missing calculator, eyes would roll. Crazy Ashley comments would pop up, and my stock would drop just a little bit more. In a few short weeks, Danny had turned our floor from a boring freshman dorm into a mix of Mean Girls and Lord of the Flies, and I was Piggy. Despite this, I kept my vengeance voice under lock and key. I could handle the mess, the sarcasm, the petty thefts, and the eye-rolling. After all, the semester was only a few months away, and then I'd be rid of Fun Danny for good. And then the pink scrunchie happened. Girls in the hallway wore scrunchies on their doorknobs to indicate that one of their roommates was receiving a guest. With Holly carrying the torch for her hometown boyfriend, this wasn't a problem. But with Danny, pink scrunchie became a serious workout, and I soon found myself spending most of my time in the study room. I tried to find a middle ground in my relationship with the arrogant Jezebel, who had opened a brothel in my house. I suggested setting up a regular schedule for her to maintain the parade of makeup-clad scholars, poets, baristas, and couriers she let in and out every now and then. Or perhaps I suggested she could try outdoor activities. When my attempts at detente failed to thaw the Cold War in the room, I tried to beat her at her own game. I bought myself a pink scrunchie and hung it on the door so I could carve out a few hours to study at my desk. Even so, under Danny's relentless onslaught, I spent most of my time in exile in the study hall. Perhaps we would have stayed that way, exchanging scratches, vying for control of the room, had it not been for my first big test on world economics. Unfortunately, it was scheduled for the day after one of Danny's marathon days, which meant I wasn't allowed to get to my textbooks and notes. After waiting in the break room for 3 hours, I got fed up and committed a cardinal sin. I ignored the pink scrunch. I expected to see Danny, but her bed was empty. I wondered for a second if she had already left and just forgot to bring her scrapbooking with her. Then I caught some movement on my side of the room, and it took my brain a moment to realize what I was seeing. Danny turned her head. "Get out!" she shouted. "Screw you!" I yelled back. "Not on my damn desk!" I grabbed a can of Lysol from the nightstand and started spraying. My desk, my book, Danny! I screamed. He screamed. She, stumbling to the floor, followed him, and I splayed her as she walked out the door. It was done. At that moment, the little ballsy part of my brain that came up with cool ideas for pranks stopped whispering and started screaming. I ignored the first wave of ideas. Bengay and her lotion. Well, lots of Bengay. And superglue. I waited. I tried to calm down. And once I calmed down, I started planning. My revenge was going to be sneaky. Danny's smartass remarks had already gotten me labeled as a weirdo in the hallway, and our altercation had put us both on probation, and any further infraction could get me expelled. Fortunately, I knew how to be sneaky. Another interesting fact, in my college's student health department, antibiotics were handed out like candy, and the girls in my hallway often dropped them halfway through. Getting amoxicillin tablets was easier than buying a beer. One last interesting fact. When antibiotics are mixed with juice, they become almost tasteless. I had already noticed that berry blue was Danny's favorite Gatorade flavor. Whenever I loaded a multi-pack in the fridge, they were the first to disappear. When Danny finished her course of antibiotics, she was healthy as a horse. By the end of February, the low-budget brothel was closed. By the end of freshman year, we could barely see each other without it turning into a screaming fight. Next chapter. So, a little time to clarify a few things. First of all, let's talk about my little voice of revenge. For the record, I want it to be known that it's my voice, not some demon or the neighbor's dog or some other crap. I have some issues, obviously, but multiple personality disorder, schizophrenia, and borderline personality disorder are not among them. As for the classic trio, attention deficit disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and autism, well, the jury is still out on that one. I've never taken the tests because I really don't want to see what the results will be. You don't have to be Freud to realize that I have classic symptoms of all three disorders, and I don't at all want to become another crazy person whose problems are rolled up into a convenient diagnosis. I've made bad decisions. I've done stupid things. And as far as I'm concerned, everything else, overwork, insecurity, AD, OCD, and so on, Well, those are just excuses. One of the positive aspects of my time in the study lounge was getting to know Mickey Collins, a similarly high school student who was also into organization and had a roommate who gave it away for free to half the campus. We ended up living together for the rest of college. And while we fought a few times about classifying our spices, alphabetically, not by kitchen, she was kind enough not to comment on the fact that I categorized my underwear by color, age, and material. I think that's why we're still friends to this day. Anyway, we settled in together at the beginning of sophomore year. By Christmas, I even started dating. I soon discovered the joy and the misery of relationships. Most college guys I discovered were a lot like my brothers, at least as far as running a household was concerned. Being enlightened millennial males, they didn't expect me to clean up after them. However, they also didn't feel that their enlightened feminism somehow obligated them to clean up after themselves, so spending time with most of them meant wallowing in filth. After college, I went into finance, which fulfilled my need for order. Numbers always add up. 1 plus 1 always equals 2, no matter how many zeros come after the ones. And while there is a little room for maneuvering when it comes to things like insider trading or creative accounting, we're all generally well aware of where the moral and legal boundaries lie. Money also has no conscience, and that appeals to my sense of balance as well. After all, if you're an idiot, or if your advisor is an idiot and you don't have the sense to fire him, you probably deserve to lose your money. Watching my clients prosper while other investors failed fed the part of me that believed in rewarding virtue and punishing vice. I may have been the only person in the world who cheered for Bernie Madoff. If you were stupid and rich enough to invest with this guy, you clearly need to get a real job. If you're in finance and ambitious, you want to end up on Wall Street. However, given my obsession with hygiene and a strong, albeit idiosyncratic, sense of right and wrong, there was no way I was going to get a job at Salomon Brothers or one of the other fraternal Wall Street firms. Instead, I ended up at Pierce, Bateman, Green, Potter, and McDuke, a prim, prissy investment firm that had the best employee retention rate on Wall Street. Part of that was due to the office environment. Instead of relying on fear, harassment, forcing their brokers to work 100-plus hours a week, at Pierce, Bateman utilized cool planning, ample staffing, and unbridled greed. We still worked long hours, 60-hour weeks were common, but nothing like the burnout at other firms. And while our starting salaries were much lower, things leveled off as we moved up the ladder. But even more than that, Pierce and Bateman was looking for employees who were willing to look to the future. People who were ready to look forward to a long and successful career, rather than a short and brutal fight for this year's pot of gold. People who wanted to start a family and sought the professional stability to make that possible. That stability worked both ways. Instead of the drunken orgies rumored at other companies, Pierce Bateman hosted relaxed, collegial happy hours on Thursdays where we loosened our ties, metaphorical ties in my case, and got to know each other. Spouses were strongly encouraged to attend. Admittedly, Pierce, the family atmosphere at Bateman, was more reminiscent of the Corleones than the Cleavers. And as one of the few female employees who didn't have a boyfriend, much less a husband, I felt like a bit of a perpetual Frito. Still, I was part of the family and had good company. The Pierce, Bateman's low-key approach allowed them to hire the best. Well, except for Winslow Hubble. In a way, Winslow had everything Pierce and Bateman were looking for. He was well-dressed and affable, with the manners and banter of a schoolboy. He also had the requisite list of wealthy friends and relatives, many of whom undoubtedly wanted to join the ranks of our clients. On the other hand, he was stunningly incompetent. I'm sure one of his college professors must have made him look at the profit and loss statement, but as far as Winslow was concerned, he might as well have been speaking Urdu. And when it came to the jargon of our business, I once overheard a partner ask Winslow about the company's EBITDA. EBITDA is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, and it's one of the first metrics you check when you're researching a company. Anyway, Winslow paused, chuckled condescendingly, and said he wasn't sure. He'd never drunk domestic beer. The poor partner just stood there blinking. There was talk around the campfire that Winslow got his job thanks to his mom and dad. While I wasn't sure how true that was, I knew for a fact that the senior Hubbles had invested over $100 million in the firm. Moreover, I was one of the fund analysts tasked with making sure their money continued to grow at a healthy rate. On the surface, hiring Winslow was a monumental failure, but after working at Pierce, Bateman for a while, I realized that it was actually a masterful move. For the rest of the worker bees, Winslow was like a trophy, a visual reminder of what we were all fighting for. Sure, we didn't want to be his likeness. My goodness, he looked like 200 pounds of horseradish and mashed potatoes roughly molded into the likeness of a human being. But he was proof of what we could accomplish. If we work hard enough, make enough money, build enough strong clients, kiss enough ass, well, maybe our kids will be incompetent, bumbling morons and still be able to make six figures. Hell, that's the American dream, right? Despite the company's ban on working too long hours, I still managed to spend about 80 hours a week at my desk. I had nothing to do. When it came to dating, New York was a little better than college. Some men were a little neater. But if I wanted someone to woo, it looked like I'd have to settle for an older man. I decided to put the problem to rest and put up with the long hours at work and the occasional one-night stand. I decided that when my marital status started to interfere with my advancement, I would find an older guy who could clean up after himself. Well, or I'll look at mail-order grooms. Maybe Ireland is exporting? As for finding random one-night stands, Mickey Collins was a lifesaver. She lived in the city too, and dragged me to all the tacky, sweaty music venues around New York City. In fact, that's how I met my husband Charlie. We were at a We Were Promised Jetpacks concert, and I was carrying 2 solo cups filled with overpriced Budweiser when the crowd shoved it my way. I zigged when I should have zagged, and ended up with one of the beers on it. Luckily, it was my beer that ended up on Charlie's shirt. If things had turned out differently, we might never have talked, much less gotten married. I know this about myself, and I'm not proud of it. He was amazingly nice about it, much nicer than I would have been. And when he told me that I'd wet his third favorite shirt, so I definitely owed him a dance, I knew this was someone I should take seriously. I discovered that most people don't sort their t-shirts very carefully, and I began to appreciate those who do. Of course, dancing was also a plus. When I saw Charlie's apartment 2 weeks later, I knew I had fallen in love. Everything was from IKEA, from the screamy LED lights to the scub drawer organizers. I also admired the way he rolled up his socks and arranged them by color. Not that I'll admit to looking in his drawers. Lots of things. And while he was willing to put up with the standard series of boring conversations and corporate bragging, he seemed to truly blossom after he met Marty Hubble, Winslow's wife. Watching their conversation at the corner table, I sometimes felt a prick of jealousy, but mostly I was grateful for a husband who was willing to work so hard to help my career. He even allowed me to invite almost his entire office to our wedding, which took place about a year after we met. On the work front, the wedding was also a boon. When the ring came along, I had already been working as a junior analyst for 3 years, which was putting me on a deadline for a promotion to full analyst. The promotion came 2 months after the ring. I want to be clear. Although Charlie helped me at work, that's not why I fell in love with him, and it's certainly not why I married him. Why did I fall in love with Charlie? It's another place where I wanted to be a better writer. With him, I was either wild and outrageous, or rude and athletic, or yes, buttoned up and organized. I was more than I thought I could be, and he was more with me too. There was something between us that had no name. As vulgar as it sounds, I felt complete. I had a man who saw all of me and still loved me. A man who soothed my wounds and supported my weakness. There are no words for it, and those terms you hear. My other half. The wind beneath my wings, the yin to my yang, don't even reflect how deep it felt to be part of the Charlie and Ashley couple. It was safe. It was exciting. It was like it turned up the volume on the world, making everything more real. Which is why, 2 years after Winslow, Charlie remains the only man. The only man I've ever loved, and the only man I can imagine. And yes, given how this story began, The irony is not lost on me. Next chapter. Of course, we still had pitfalls and obstacles. Just because I fell in love, learned a lot, and married the man of my dreams doesn't mean I became a different person, or that my destructive tendencies magically disappeared. Quite the opposite. When you pack two determined, somewhat obsessive cleaners into a 400 square foot apartment, essentially a 20-foot square box, you have some friction. Add to that two high-pressure jobs that left Charlie and I exhausted by the end of the day, and then add the lack of time to clean up during the week. This is not a recipe for domestic bliss. I kept a close eye on my need to control, but completely overlooked a more important, and ultimately more damaging, trend. Over time, as I channeled all my energies into climbing the hill to senior analyst, I began to see Charlie as my life support system. When I came home from work, he was the person who kept me energized. When I needed help with a project, a different perspective on a problem, someone to run a last-minute errand, or just give me a hug and make me forget about everything in the world, he was there. He was there everywhere. Taking care of me wasn't Charlie's responsibility, but he took it upon himself and I let him. I started to forget that loving me was something Charlie chose to do, not something he was paid to do. And when I forgot that, I started to love myself a lot less. And that's how the pants episode happened. Next chapter. First, let's get this straight. The pants episode wasn't entirely my fault. When you have two clean-cut weirdos living in a tiny apartment, it goes without saying that you end up with a pretty strict housekeeping routine. Every Saturday morning, we combed the apartment from top to bottom, and every 2 months we did a real purge. We'd take a few bags to the dumpster, a few bags to Goodwill, and then shake our brains out in the middle of the newly vacated, freshly vacuumed living room floor. It was one of my favorite traditions. The morning in question was cleaning day. It started with us turning in a huge load of laundry to the laundromat, which meant both of our laundry bags were involved. 3 of my favorite dresses needed to be taken to the dry cleaners, and with no laundry bags, I put them in a garbage bag. Yeah, I know. What kind of idiot puts her favorite dresses in a garbage bag on trash day? But even so, did it never occur to Charlie to check the bags before throwing them in Goodwill? Yes, Dr. Thompson, I know. Shifting the blame. I was burdening my husband with a heavy workload on Saturday morning. Checking the bags was my job. But still. And yes, I overreacted. Perhaps I shouldn't have yelled at him. And when he ran out of the apartment, a smart person, a rational person, might have realized she was a little overreacting. A rational person would have stopped there. And no, I wasn't rational. In retrospect, I definitely shouldn't have waited until he was asleep and then thrown away all 12 pairs of his pants. And the next morning when he texted asking where his pants were, I also shouldn't have texted back, "Check at Goodwill." The smirking emoji was too drastic a move. So yes, I bear most of the blame. Most of the blame. Maybe even all of the blame. But in my defense, there was a bright side to this pants fiasco. Charlie had a lot of gaudy pants from Uniqlo and H&M before the purge. Colored jeans, shiny polyester pants. Sure, his job wasn't up to the same standards as mine, but you dress for the job you want, and his Uniqlo chinos said his dream job was working at the post office. Yeah, I know. Look, it's hard to get away with making excuses. I ended up undermining my husband's trust and ruining our marriage. And that's not the worst part. The worst part was that the pants episode triggered something in me. It had been years since the Donnie Steinberg incident. Years during which I had kept most of myself on a leash. And while I was appalled by my behavior, some part of me, a bigger part than I'd like to admit, felt like it had been let out of prison. In retrospect, I can say that Charlie took the whole pants thing incredibly calmly. He probably would have been entitled to walk out the door, or at least show up to my work happy hour in cropped sweatpants. But no, he bought himself new pants, had them tailored, and dutifully walked into 3 Olives, looking like the perfect model of the modern male financier. Apologies to Gilbert and Sullivan, of course. But while things seemed to be getting better, there were still problems bubbling beneath the surface. We should have talked about it. Instead, Charlie treated me silently for 4 days. It was effective. He was a talkative man, and his silence was louder than most people's screams. Without words, it told me that he was seriously angry. The only thing I didn't realize until much later was how deep that anger was. Still, I slowed down. I didn't stop completely. After all, the little revenge voice was free, and he was hungry. Instead, I started looking for little things to punish him for, and then pulling little pranks to even out the scales. Filling the sugar bowl with salt, stealing the book he was reading, taking all the marshmallows from his Lucky Charms. Little revenge for little things. Over time, we slowly returned to normal, or at least the new normal. Replenishing our closet for a couple months wiped out all our expenses, and we had to look for free activities. Or rather, I had to look, as punishment, I took it upon myself to plan our calendar. I discovered free concerts in Central Parks and tracked down the best musical acts on the subway. $2.75 subway fare for live music. I sought out weird little museums all over the city and tracked down their free admission days like I was a Catholic mom with 10 kids and 5 bedrooms. We picnicked in cemeteries and lounged afternoons on city beaches. We talked and laughed and discussed our big dreams and our least favorite foods and the fact that most modern art is a joke. We became closer than ever. And then Caitlin Kahn happened. Next chapter. I won't even pretend that my reaction to Caitlin was rational. When I met her at a 5K race sponsored by Charlie's company, she launched voices I didn't even know existed. There was my familiar voice of revenge, plus the voice of jealousy, the voice of insecurity. A totally freaking irrational voice. The thing is, Caitlin was really nice. She was a little shy and seemed to feel a little awkward in her thin sweatshirt and tights. I think she pointed out at least 3 times that these were not the usual thick sweaters and corduroy pants she wears to the office. And I was very nice too. Handling the money of annoying old preppies, I knew how to put a nice smile on my face when talking to people I could happily gut. Caitlin and I chatted about all sorts of silly things, where she bought her shoes and where she went to school, how long she'd been running, and what the best diner in her neighborhood was. Standard, superficial conversation between a devoted wife and her husband's friendly coworker. But beneath the surface, I was seething. Watching Caitlin, I felt jealousy and vulnerability. Looking at her, I saw the fragility of the shelter Charlie and I had built. I wanted to lock the doors, to board up the windows, hide my Barbies. I'd been to Charlie's office Christmas parties and met his coworkers, but that's when I first realized, really, deeply realized, that he had a whole other life besides me. A beautiful woman who looked up to him, colleagues who relied on him, a job that mattered to a lot of people. At Pierce Bateman, Charlie was the handyman who came to weekly happy hours to support me. Every Thursday, he watched me flirt and make my way through a crowd of men who were pretty hot, if you liked strong chins, expensive suits, and inflated egos. He knew everything about my world, from the pet names of my coworkers to the due dates of my projects. God, when I think of how much time he spent talking to Winslow with a fake smile on his face while that slimeball was humbled and not so humbled, I think maybe Charlie deserves a Nobel Prize. Or at least sainthood. But when it came to his work, I was the absentee wife. I didn't know if his company had happy hours or if he attended them. I didn't know about his work projects or even what he was doing. And then a horrible thought occurred to me. What if the only reason we'd gone to the Central Park race that day was because I was a runner and Charlie knew I'd have fun? I felt the blood rush from my face. What did it say about our relationship that I only came to his events when I liked them? I thought I heard thunder in the distance, a storm on the horizon, threatening to destroy my perfect life. Watching Charlie with Caitlin, I realized that my willingness to overlook half of Charlie's life had left the door open to potential predators. A smart person, a rational person would have taken advantage of the red flag and looked a little deeper into her husband's work life. As for me, all I could focus on was the fact that a beautiful woman was casting masculine glances at my husband and he wasn't pushing her away. My jealous side was saying, "Oh man, no!" And my little revenge side was hatching the idea of cutting her hair, one strand at a time. No scissors. As for my rational side, she seemed to be packing for a trip to Rio. As we walked back to the apartment, I stared at Charlie in silence. I'm sure he could see my anger in the angle of my jaw and the stiffness of my stride. When we finally talked, he'd done everything right, minimized his relationship with Caitlin, talked about how much he loved me, flirted until I was, well, not happy, but at least calmed down. How did he put up with me? How could he tolerate my behavior? Even after 2 years with Dr. Thompson, I still can't figure it out. When I got home, I did exactly what you would expect a jealous, immature, guilty wife to do. I had fun with him. Maybe I hoped I'd leave him so devastated that he'd have nothing left to give to Caitlin or the other women in his office. I decided to pay more attention to my husband, and in the meantime, remind him of where he belongs. Charlie's behavior in the weeks that followed didn't reassure me, but I'm not sure there's anything to reassure. The voice of vengeance went crazy, reminding me over and over again of how Caitlin looked at him like a munificent cow. Not to mention the way she and Marty Hubble huddled together at happy hour, or the admiring look he got from the barista at our neighborhood Starbucks. Having seen one threat, I now saw them everywhere. And yet, I hung in there. Until Hell Week. Next chapter. Once a year, Charlie's office would go into overdrive as they rushed to publish the company's annual report. His team would suddenly go from an 8-hour workday to a 12-hour day or even longer. I knew it was coming, but I wasn't prepared for the visual reminder that Charlie's world extended beyond our apartment. Our marriage. On the first day of Hell Week, Charlie came home about 4 hours late and looked terrible. The last shreds of my rational side whispered that his dirty clothes, 1,000 yard stare, and obvious fatigue were all indicative of a long, brutal day at work. Meanwhile, jealous me stood there with a mouthpiece and shouted that being exhausted and being well entertained are very similar. And the not-so-rational me, the new girl who showed up around the day of Charlie's 5K, heard the thunder, felt another earthquake roll through our cozy, comfortable oasis, and finally lost my temper. I still blush when I think of my poor husband, wobbly on his feet as I scolded him for coming home late from work. How many times had I come home 1, 2, 3 hours late, irritated and tired, demanding that he please me? It doesn't matter. I'd heard the rumbling, seen his cloudy eyes, and was in no mood to reason straight. Before I let him crawl into bed, I made him promise that no matter what, he would respond to my messages within 10 minutes. But even then, I knew I was going to extreme measures. God, I was confused. But here's the thing, and I'm pretty sure I'm not blaming the victim. I wasn't alone in this. Charlie was there too. That week. That first night. Would have been a very good time for him to talk to me about my behavior. Maybe he should have told me I was acting crazy. Or for that matter, he could have pulled out a pair of pants and just thrown me a meaningful look. Maybe he should have suggested I see a counselor. Or maybe he should have just yelled at me. I was counting on Charlie to provide a happy, stable home for us, even if it led to conflict. Perhaps that's unfair, but it's also true. Sometimes, I think, loving someone means telling them to clean up their act. But instead of calling me to order, Charlie did his best to placate me, which in turn fueled the beast. Looking back, I realized that he was so malleable because he cared about our relationship. But at the time, I wondered if he was giving in so quickly because he was tormented by his conscience. I had no way of finding out what was going on in Charlie's office. Hiring a private investigator would have been too expensive, and other options like hacking into his cell phone, bugging his backpack, or installing a keylogger on his laptop weren't very useful either. After all, any communication with Caitlin was going to have to be face-to-face, away from the nearest convenient recording device. The only real solution was to become Charlie's probation officer, which I did. I texted him constantly, trying to catch him in the act. When he kept texting me back, I should have calmed down. After all, he clearly wasn't cheating on me, right? But no, I still couldn't shake the suspicion that somehow, some way, he was still managing to have fun with someone behind my back. Instead of dispelling my doubts, each of his replies only reinforced them. In the morning, when Charlie finally didn't show up, I was almost relieved. Suddenly, all the tension was gone. There was no reason to worry anymore, no reason to hold back the lust for revenge. Charlie had made his decision, and all that was left was to devise a plan to restore balance. Next chapter. From what I've heard, people usually cheat because they don't respect their spouses, or they seek control, or they have some sort of, oh my god, I'm getting old, and I need to entertain some strange guy pearl clutching syndrome. None of those options applied to me. Well, maybe I had control issues. Okay, maybe I had a lot of control issues. I saw Charlie as my man and taking care of me as his job. And I didn't feel cared for, so I took it upon myself to balance the scales. Yeah, maybe there was a respect issue here too. Of course, I didn't see any of that at the time. All I saw was a husband who didn't socialize with the woman and a few unaccounted for hours in the office. An office that was full of closets and empty conference rooms. An office just a couple blocks from the Liberty Inn, an hourly hotel on the west side that claimed to be the backwater of New York City. How long had it been since Charlie and I had visited the Liberty? Since the pants episode? And how hard would it have been for him and Caitlin to go out and get laid? And since we haven't had any afternoon pleasures, how likely is it that he's burning the sheets with a strange woman in a hotel we know nothing about? Hell yes, the jury exclaimed with glee, their verdict unanimous. Burn him. Burn it. Restore the balance. But even as I decided that balance had to be restored, I realized that having an affair wasn't that easy. I didn't want to turn things the other way. I already felt bad enough that Charlie was cheating on me. Us. But if I were to have fun with someone else, things would get complicated. Then I would be the cheater, and Charlie would be justifiably vengeful towards me. And that would start the cycle. This wasn't about destroying my marriage. This was about saving it. At least that's what I told myself. There were logistical issues, too. My job had me chained to my desk, so I couldn't go trotting around the financial district looking for someone to take home. What if I couldn't control my new lover? What if he passed something on to me? So many variables, so much clutter. God, I hate clutter. I've heard that a lot of romances start in the office. It's not hard to see why. There's opportunity, temptation, interaction, and lots of horizontal surfaces. If I were looking for a real romance, if I wanted to cheat on my husband, maybe develop feelings for someone else, generally have my world rocked, my office would be a universal place to shop. While Pierce, Bateman had no physical fitness requirements or minimum hair products for employees, the office was full of gym rats with heads full of high-end protein gels and curl creams. Trouble is, the place was also full of egomaniacs, the kind who claim that they are the ones who decide whether to start or end an affair, and whether or not to throw it in a cuckold's face. The kind of egotists who delighted in conquering a woman and were prone to whispering about it in the office and at weekly get-togethers. The kind of egotists who wouldn't hesitate to destroy my career and marriage for bragging rights. I needed to find a puppet, a guy I could control, who would be happy to get some weirdness, who wouldn't interfere with my emotions, and who I would have no problem dumping when the time came. Ideally, someone from the office. I needed Winslow Hubble. He was perfect, unattractive, not too smart, a total badass with a lot to lose, and not smart enough to realize I had a lot to lose. Plus, screwing him would make Marty Hubble a head shorter. At least in my mind. Just like that, 6 days later, I found myself staring at the ceiling, wondering if my husband had replaced the smoke detector. Next chapter. Sometimes you hear about cheaters who don't expect to get caught and are surprised when their loving husband or wife starts yelling, screaming, and throwing things. That's not about me. On some level, I guess I always expected Charlie to get caught. I imagined he'd get upset with me. I'd retaliate by lashing out at him with rage about Caitlin and Marty. We'd have the big fight we so desperately needed, and eventually return to some sort of equilibrium. I'll dump Winslow. Charlie will calm down about Caitlin and Marty, and we'll move on together. It was a beautiful dream. I'd bet everything on Charlie's endless love for me, his reasonableness, his willingness to work things out. I never imagined that he would just end my relationship. But that's exactly what he did. And this time, I didn't have a backup plan. When Charlie sent me that video of me and Winslow, I almost lost my lunch. It was so disgusting. Was Charlie laughing at me? Was he crying? The embarrassment lasted a few minutes, and then I was filled with anger. How dare Charlie throw Winslow in my face? How dare he threaten me with divorce over this? Didn't he know the ordeal I'd gone through to keep us together? How hard was it to find a way to forgive his cheating without compromising myself? Oh my God. The fact that I let that filthy bastard inside of me? Just because Charlie had a video and I didn't, how the hell could he hold a high position? I felt like I was on fire, burning with anger. And to make matters worse, Charlie hadn't even deigned to stay home where I could yell at him, threaten him, attack him, cry on him, make him love me. That first night, I broke a few things. Okay, I broke a lot of things, including most of our dishes, glassware, framed pictures, and an umbrella. And then, being me, I cleaned it all up. I'm sure there are many people who can completely lose themselves in a destructive rage and then collapse on the couch and eat a pint of Ben & Jerry's. I'm not one of them. The only thing I didn't do was touch his clothes. We were long past the point where a few pairs of disappearing pants could balance the scales. My rational voice whispered that I'd thrown us off balance, but I drowned it out, buried it under several tons of rage and self-justification, peed on the grave, and set the cemetery on fire. Then I sent Charlie a bunch of angry texts and phone calls. Then I got drunk. Then I sent a few more phone messages that were more sentimental than angry. Then I went to bed. The next week was a living hell. I felt like the ugliest kid in Siberia. I missed Charlie. It was like a physical illness. My skin ached from his touch. My stomach clenched. I felt empty inside, as empty as his side of the bed. My chest felt empty, hollow. I felt like I was being blown around by the wind. Charlie didn't respond to my texts, phone calls, emails, and WhatsApp messages. He deleted me from my friends on Instagram, Facebook, and Snapchat. I thought about bugging him at his office, but his building had multiple entrances, so he could easily dodge me. I called his mom, who was clearly cool, and his dad, who didn't even bother to answer the phone. And then it hit me. I had met several of his friends over the years, but never bothered to get their contact information. As if I needed another reminder of how absent-minded a wife I was. I remembered Charlie's silence during those days when I'd thrown his pants away, and my horror intensified. This guy could teach my parents a lesson in punishment. There was nothing worse than him turning his back on me. I'd always been the more coldly calculating of the two of us, but after Winslow, Charlie had put me in an awkward position. With a few surgical incisions, he'd carefully cut himself out of my life. The day after he left, I came home from work and found his belongings missing. A week later, a bailiff stood on my doorstep with a manila envelope in hand. Charlie wanted to take half of our joint savings and a few belongings from the apartment. We would keep our own retirement accounts, and he offered to let me keep all the furniture. It was a fair deal, perhaps even a generous one. It's the kind of deal one offers when they want to get things over with quickly. I was furious. I went back to his parents, but I got nothing. Charlie talked to my parents, and they weren't much help either. Dad said he was disappointed in me, and Mom cried. I wondered if they were trying to figure out a way to send me to my room and deprive me of dessert. I didn't have enough money to hire a good lawyer, but I did everything I could to delay, waiting until the last minute to respond to his divorce petition, demanding a hearing, demanding counseling. I couldn't stop the process, but I slowed it down. All I wanted, I told his lawyer, was contact, a chance to talk. After 2 months of procrastination, I got what I wanted. Charlie wrote me a letter. Dear Ashley. He used my full name. I'm trying to do this the easy way. I still love you. I think I always will, but I can't erase the memories of seeing you with Winslow. And even if I could, I can't spend the next 50 or 60 years wondering when, not if, I'm going to piss you off again. And I certainly can't live in fear of what you'll do for your next revenge. In 2 years, you've gone from destroying my pants to destroying my faith in you. I cringe at the thought of what you might destroy next time. I've tried to be soft on this issue. I've told both of our families that you did something that irreparably destroyed our marriage. While I'm sure they could fill in the blanks, I didn't do it for them. I also didn't show the video to anyone. What's more, I didn't even watch the last one. After I watched one, I didn't need to watch anything else. So here goes. Sign the papers. If you don't sign, I'll dig up both videos and let our families and friends know exactly what caused the breakup of our marriage. And my explanation will be well illustrated. Let's part mercifully. Let's rebuild our lives. Let me go. Charlie. Evan! I'm sure I should have realized a lot of things from this, but primarily that Charlie never got to see my last day with Winslow. I blushed at the thought of him watching, and felt a strange sense of relief that he hadn't seen the worst of it. Sure, I didn't like the thought of my parents, in-laws, friends, and co-workers seeing me rolling around in bed with Winslow, but I knew I could get through it. The hardest part would be Charlie. It was enough that he'd seen me with Winslow, but to see it on the last day, it was a humiliation I don't think I could take. And then there was Charlie threatening me. This was the man who had let me destroy his closet, who had given so much of himself to help my career, who had made my world so much bigger. I knew he was telling the truth when he said he loved me. But he was also telling the truth when he said he would destroy me if I continued to fight for a divorce. That's when I realized this wasn't a tactic, a prank, or a negotiation. Charlie was going to leave me. I was going to be alone, more alone than I had ever been before, if only because I now knew what it meant not to be alone. I felt something crumble inside me, like I was exploding or shrinking into myself, as if the emptiness had finally eaten me whole. I wrote him back. Dear Charlie, you win. If you promise to destroy the videotapes, I'll sign. Love, your Ash. His answer was short. Ashley, I promise. Charlie. I signed the papers. A few months later, we divorced. Next chapter. Epilogue. Once I accepted the inevitable, the divorce was easy. Charlie let me keep the apartment, half the money, and most of the furniture, at least what was left after my tantrum. I ended up moving in with Mickey Collins in a nice, ultra-modern apartment in Battery Park City. It was close to work, and the neighborhood was beautiful in the spirit of Logan's Run and a utopian future. All in all, it was exactly how I envisioned Toronto. And yet I missed our cozy little neighborhood, the Zabar's store on the corner, the old Irish bar on the next street. Most of all, I missed Charlie. Sam. I found out later that he had moved in with his friend Aaron in Jackson Heights and then got his own place there. On the one hand, it was Queens, so I clearly won. On the other hand, I sometimes imagined Charlie in Little India, Little Thailand, or Little Mexico, wandering through curry stores, street sari stores, and open-air markets. On amazing adventures. Without me. And that's when I realized I had lost. I rushed to work, running inside as soon as the doors opened and staying there until the janitors escorted me out. I told myself I came early because my commute to work was now a 15-minute walk, and I left late because there wasn't much nightlife in Battery Park City. Lying to myself was easier than admitting that I had made work my life because I had ruined my real life. Winslow had been trying to date me for months, but it was easy for me to talk him out of it. I said I didn't want to mess up the divorce case, that I wasn't ready, that work had gotten me down, that I was depressed. All the standard excuses. And he, being Winslow, would nod his head, say, yes, that's reasonable. And look at me with puppy dog eyes, letting me know what he wanted. After 6 of our afternoon meals together, the puppy dog eyes had no effect on me. Marty Hubble still came to happy hours at 3 Olives. She seemed normal, but there was a sense of sadness about her. Perhaps it was partly because, with no Charlie to keep her company, she was forced to hang out with the rest of the wannabe trophy wives from Aqua Mist. Sometimes she would look at me, and I could see something in her eyes. Anger? Pity? I hope it was anger. A year after the divorce, Winslow took a vacation. When he returned a month later, he couldn't meet my gaze, or indeed anyone's gaze. Then Marty stopped showing up at the Thursday night socials. From what I heard, they broke up. A few months after Winslow Light showed up at the office, I started dating again. Mickey finally pulled herself together and declared that either I would start my life over or she would look for a new roommate who, and I quote, wouldn't turn on the light every time she opened her mouth. Mickey has a way with words. We went to a few concerts together. Arctic Monkeys at Webster Hall, Gogol Bordello at an establishment in Bushwick, before we ended up at a We Were Promised Jetpacks concert in downtown Brooklyn. I should have known what would happen next. We were promised. Jetpacks weren't that popular, but it still took me by surprise. I ran into him in the smoking area. I was so shocked that I tripped and splashed beer on my t-shirt. I didn't pay any attention to it. When he saw me, his eyebrows went up. I think he was surprised too. For a while we stared at each other, both waiting to see what the other would say. Finally, I interrupted. "Truce?" said I. He smiled. "Truce!" I wiped one of the benches. Sanitary napkins fit easily in my purse, and they're a girl's best friend. Meanwhile, he was watching with a half smile on his face. I threw him a fake look. "You like that, don't you?" The smile blurred. "Even too much. Are you going to take the sidewalk too?" "The ass!" He chuckled. "Well, are you going to sit down or what?" I said. "Still deciding. Is it safe?" I smiled back at him. No germs. We exchanged a few phrases. "Where you are. What you're doing. Did you hear?" He smirked oddly when I mentioned Winslow deflating and Marty leaving. I made a mental note to ask him about it later. Every once in a while, some hipster would come over, and we'd sit down on a bench so that our feet were almost touching. The centimeters separating us were killing me. I felt like I could feel the warmth of his knee on my skin. After a while, we ran out of things to catch up on. 2 years apart had been too full and too empty. For my part, I absorbed that time with long hours at work and grueling hours in therapy. For Charlie, it was visits and explorations filled with hole-in-the-wall restaurants, a bodega, and yes, sari stores in deepest, darkest Queens. That said, no dates. Or at least, no important dates. Finally, he threw me a look that meant it was time to rip off the Band-Aid. "Why did you do it, Ash?" he asked softly. My heart beat faster when I heard him say my name. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people had called me Ash in my life, but no one could make me feel the way I felt when that tiny word came out of his mouth. I blushed. "You can probably guess," I said, looking down at my hands. "I was angry and scared. You were everything to me, and I needed you. And you gave it to me. Then one day I realized you were giving me so much, and I wasn't giving you even close." His face darkened. "You thought you were depriving me and decided to change?" "I don't think that makes sense." I sighed. I knew I was out of balance. We were out of balance. Balance. His eyes sparkled with humor, and for a moment I remembered other nights, other concerts. I was pierced by a pain so intense I froze. "So why didn't you try to balance us out?" he asked. "It would have made sense, wouldn't it?" I tried to smile back at him, but I'm sure I failed. That's exactly what I should have done. But once I realized I had failed you, I began to see danger everywhere. I soon convinced myself that you'd find a better deal. That you'd already found a better deal. A better deal? He snorted. "So did you ever realize I wasn't cheating on you?" "Yes. It was the first week of therapy. And then I realized why we couldn't get over my jealousy." I threw a death glare at the goth girl who was peering at our bench, and she bounced to the side. "Whatever you told me back then, Caitlin had a boyfriend, Caitlin had a girlfriend, Caitlin was an android? Whatever it was, I wasn't going to believe you. I was so sure I was right, so sure there could be no other answer. I would have ignored anything you said. He looked impressed. And you accomplished that in 1 week of therapy? I grinned unfunny. It took me 3 months to figure that part out. I'm still trying to figure out how things got this far in the first place. Why I sabotaged myself, us, so completely. And what did you come up with? I grinned. Well, it's been 2 years since the divorce, thousands of dollars in therapy, and here's what I came up with. I was definitely in my own little world, was incredibly selfish, and set my marriage on fire. I snorted. What the hell? That's a start. He didn't smile back. But why Winslow? Oh, that's easy. I leaned my back against the wall. Winslow was a joker. He was easy to convince, easy to control, and there was no way he'd give me away. Most of all, I chose him because he was so awful. I knew there was no way I could ever fall in love with him. I gave Charlie another wobbly smile. And I would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for you damn kids. He answered me with a wobbly smile. You know there's no way I could have stayed with you. Not after that. Yeah, your letter made that clear. I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke among the clouds of mango vape. Someone was actually smoking in the smoking area. I wondered if any of the random hipsters were going to call the bouncer. What I don't get is that you never got back at me and Winslow. I can't live with that. I'd have to balance the scales. Balance the scales? Who says I didn't? He looked thoughtful. About a year after our divorce, I met up with Winnie. I had a little time on my hands, and I learned about everything, all his little demons. I laid them out on the table. He grinned. The thing about Winnie is that his whole self-image was built like a house of cards, on favors from his parents, on scandals they kept quiet, on events they arranged. It took me about an hour for it all to come crashing down. That's it? I felt disappointed. Winslow had helped destroy our marriage and he just got a stern talking to? Charlie shrugged. I also gave him a video of you and him together. Let him see himself in action. Let him hear him talk about me. I think I've half convinced him that he's gay. I chuckled. It sounded almost real this time. That explains a lot about what happened to him. He's confused. It's like he's turned into a ghost that haunts the office. The smoking area emptied out. Apparently, the band was going to continue their performance. He deserved it. Charlie's face was stone cold. I also gave Winslow another video. I felt a pain in my gut. Not on the last day. He looked at me. I promised I'd destroy it without looking. I keep my promises. I blushed, and the pain in my stomach rose higher. It wasn't hard to guess what he meant, after all. There was one among us who didn't keep her promises. Through the walls of the smoking area, I heard the sounds of drums. The band was starting up. So, what was that second video? It was me and someone else. And before you ask, I'm not going to tell you who it was. Suffice it to say that I'm pretty sure it ruined Winslow. It wasn't hard to guess who Charlie's partner was. Damn, Marty. I felt anger flare up, but I suppressed it. What right did I have to be angry? I left my marriage and he moved on. To goddamn Marty, literally. I took a shaky breath, clenched my hands. He'd said he wasn't seeing anyone else, which meant whatever he had with Marty was probably over. I hoped so. I heard bass through the wall, drums, heavy, pounding. But why didn't you punish me? I asked. After all, I'm the one who betrayed you. Charlie smiled. Yeah, but Winnie was the one who took advantage of a bad situation. He threw me a sharp look. Besides, who says I didn't punish you? I rolled my eyes. Come on, Charlie. You could have torn my life apart. Fire me, ruin my relationship with my parents, destroy all my friendships. You could have made me a leper. But instead, you gave my parents your version of events, handed me a fair divorce settlement, and, as far as I can tell, never said another word about it. He didn't answer for a long time. I listened to the drums and bass as the song came to an end. How do you punish someone you love, Ash? How do you decide what's fair? Balanced? He crossed his legs and stared at the wall for a second. It was the pensive face he made when he was trying to find the perfect words. I missed that look. I saw the video. The one from the 5th day. I saw how bad you felt. But you made it through it anyway. I looked at my hands. They were a blur. I thought I had to. My voice cracked. To balance. He smiled again. But this time the smile was dark. It didn't reach his eyes. You know, I did get a little revenge after all. I froze. You haven't watched The Last Day, have you? Damn it, Ashley, I made a promise. I blushed. I'd never heard him so angry. Then what? What did you do? A new song came on. I heard the bass, the beginning. He looked at me as if deciding whether to say the words. Finally, he squared his shoulders. That last day, I watched the video around 11 o'clock in the morning. Yeah? And I called you at 6:30 that night. I don't understand. The cameras were wired so that when they were activated, I would get a notification on my phone. That last day, the notification came at 5:15. Understanding came. So on the last day, you were able to stop? Yes. I had about 6 hours to stop it. 6 hours where I thought about calling you and letting you off the hook. Thinking about how far you'd go to punish me. Thought about the punishment I deserved. And you let me go through with it. I felt my face redden. For 6 hours. Uh-huh. The song was in full swing. I could almost hear the words. The singer's Scottish accent came through the wall. But why? How? You were acting crazy, Ashley. I couldn't punish you for being crazy. His eyes went hard again. They were so dark, so cold. But that doesn't mean I couldn't let you punish yourself. I shuddered. Winslow's dirty finger, dropping it on the floor, scratching my skin over and over. Charlie could have stopped all of this with a phone call, but he didn't. He decided I needed to be punished, and I couldn't bring myself to honor his request. I felt out of place. I was angry, very angry, and somewhat impressed. In the end, admiration took precedence over anger. Charlie's revenge was exactly what I would have done. He allowed me to trap myself, to punish myself, to humiliate myself, while giving him everything he needed to cut me out of his life. It was evil and brilliant, perfectly balanced and flawlessly executed. The singer shouted out the lyrics. Suddenly, I recognized the song. Quiet Little Voices. I had listened to it with him so many times. Quiet little voices creep into my head. I'm young again. 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 Have I corrupted my husband? Looking at his face, I could see the hidden emotions. He wasn't really proud of what he had done, but he wasn't proud either. He had no regrets. And I realized he didn't have to be. I was playing the revenge game. He played it better. Little silent monsters creep into my head. I'm going to fall in love with you. 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 I wondered where we were going next. Would I see him for the last time? Would we become friends? Friends with benefits? Get married again and get a white picket fence in the suburbs? Become international assassins and overthrow governments? I knew one thing. Whatever I did next, I wanted to do it with Charlie. I wanted to do everything with him. And if I had anything to say about it, he would realize he wanted to do it all with me. But first I realized we had a concert to catch. Luckily, Charlie had other ideas. Grab your coat, he growled at me. We're leaving. I smiled. Maybe my story would have a happy ending after all. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video. I was sitting on the hood of a car parked in front of license plate 128 when the door opened and they stepped out. She saw me, and her face lost color. Her eyes couldn't meet mine, and she looked away. As I slid off the hood of the car, he raised his hands in a protective gesture, and I said, "Don't worry. Neither of you are worth wasting your time on." I walked to my car, got in it, and drove away. It was a long story that led to this confrontation. I met Jim when his family moved in next door. He was 8, the same age as me, and was the only boy in the neighborhood. There were a few girls my age, but Jim and I were the only boys. We naturally gravitated toward each other, and by the end of 4th grade, we were as close as twin brothers. We played Little League baseball and soccer together at Pop Warner. I had his back and he had mine. If you joked with Jim, you joked with me, and vice versa. We were inseparable all the way through high school. I met Laura when I was in 10th grade and we started dating. By senior year, we were still together. Jim hooked up with Annabelle Spears, and they went on double dates with Laura and me. On prom night, Laura gave me her virginity in the next room, where Jim and Annabelle were doing the same thing. High school graduation separated us. Jim didn't want to go to college and went into the Navy. Annabelle called him all kinds of dirty words for running away and leaving her. But despite that, she said she would wait until he got a permanent duty station and then join him. Laura and I went to college. I to Eastern Michigan University, majoring in civil engineering, and Laura to the University of Michigan, majoring in information technology. The University of Michigan in Ann Arbor and the University of Michigan in Ypsilanti were only a half-hour drive from each other, so Laura and I were able to maintain a more or less stable relationship. I say more or less because a couple times Laura canceled dates with me to go on a date with a guy she met at the U of M, but of course she didn't tell me about it. I got this information from friends who also went to Michigan, and they also told me that she dated on the nights I didn't visit. One night I arrived just in time to see her get into a car with some guy and drive away. I followed them to a restaurant on Ann Arbor Road, gave them 10 minutes to go inside and get settled, and then followed them. I found them in a booth on the back row, sitting side by side instead of across from each other. He had his arm around her and she made no effort to push him away or move away and leave any distance between them. Luckily, there was a booth at the other end of the hall where I could sit, and Laura couldn't help but notice me. But it wasn't until the waitress asked what I would like to drink, and Laura heard my voice that she looked in my direction. I pretended to read the menu and didn't look directly at her, but I saw her eyes get big and she suddenly pushed the guy's hand away and moved away from him. The look on his face when she did that clearly said, "What are you doing?" That look said that this wasn't the first time they were together, or even the second or third time. They'd been together long enough for him to feel comfortable putting his arms around her and know she didn't mind. I have no idea what they were talking about, but Laura kept glancing nervously in my direction, and I sat back and pretended not to notice her. I finished my meal, got up and left without once letting Laura notice me looking at her, and then drove home. The next day was Friday, and Laura and I had a date planned for Friday night, dinner and a movie. That Friday night I missed our date. I didn't call and cancel, I just didn't go. I turned off my phone and settled in with a good book. Saturday I went to a party at the Delta Phi house and had a great time. I met a dark-haired beauty named Robin. We danced a couple times and she gave me her number and asked me to call her. On Sunday I was head over heels in my books getting ready for Monday's class when the doorbell rang. I got up, walked to the door, looked through my telescope and saw that it was Laura. I opened the door and she squeezed past me and walked into the room and then turned to me and said, "Where have you been? Where were you Friday night, and why didn't you answer the phone?" I closed the door, turned to her and asked what question she wanted me to answer first. "What?" It was 3 questions. "Which one do you want me to answer first?" "Don't be nice, Rob. What's going on?" "Okay, then I'll answer them in the order I like. First is where I've been. Mostly here, although Saturday night I went to a frat party. Next is why I didn't answer the phone. That's easy. I didn't answer the phone because he didn't call. Of course, it's my fault since I'm the one who unplugged him. Next, where were you Friday night?" "I was here. I called for pizza and spent the evening reading a really good book." "Why didn't you call me and let me know you weren't coming?" "I figured you already had something going on with your boyfriend." "My boyfriend? What are you talking about, Rob? You are my boyfriend." "Eh? Then who were you in love with at the restaurant Thursday night?" "He's just an acquaintance of mine and we weren't in love with each other." Sitting next to you hip to hip, you leaned against him and he put his arm around you isn't lovey-dovey? Then what would you call it? It doesn't mean anything, Rob. We're just friends. If you don't think you're doing something wrong, Laura, why didn't you get up and come over and say hello? How about asking me to join you to introduce me to your friend? Maybe sit down with me and have a few words with me before heading out on a date? Maybe you didn't do that because then he might wonder who I was and you didn't want to tell him. Why didn't you get up and walk over if it bothered you so much? Because I wanted to see how you behaved. To see how I act? Why would you want to do that? Because I've had too many people tell me about how much you date when I'm not around. I've also been told that you've been seeing guys on the nights you've had your dates with me blown off, so yeah, I wanted to see how you acted with another guy. You don't own me, Rob. Nowhere does it say we're in an exclusive relationship. I thought we did, Laura. I seem to remember giving you my cool ring and a letter sweater as a sign that we weren't breaking up. A sweater with a letter? A ring? We're doing well? Come on, Rob, that's so high school. Maybe, but it happened in high school, and when we left high school, I don't remember you giving me those things back and saying, we're done with school, so all bets are off. But that's okay. Since you don't feel like it binds you, I guess I can look at it the same way. I met a nice girl at that party, and she gave me her phone number, so I guess I can call her now. Laura got a nasty look on her face, and she hissed, "Fine! Go ahead, I don't care," and walked away. As she left, I thought about the fact that she didn't make excuses, didn't say she wouldn't do it again, and didn't try to convince me that I was her one and only. In her mind, she was no longer a schoolgirl. She was a grown woman now, and things had to be different. It wasn't easy to do since we had been together for so long, but it was better to find out what was on her mind now than later. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I had a bunch of homework, so it wasn't until Thursday that I was able to call Robin. We talked for a bit and then made a date for Friday night. I picked her up, we had dinner, and then instead of a movie, she decided she wanted to go to a party she knew about. The party was at an apartment in Belleville. We got there a little after 8, and wouldn't you know it, it was just meant to be. The first people I saw when we walked through the door were Laura and the guy she'd gone out with Thursday night. "Oh shit," said I. "What's the matter?" asked Robin. "Them," I said, pointing at Laura and the guy. "Do you know them?" "I know her." "Do you know Miss Piggy?" "Miss A. Piggy?" "That's her nickname." "Why does she have that nickname?" "She's a whore. A real pig, that's why someone labeled her Miss Piggy." "Are you sure she's a slut?" "What else would you call a girl who has a steady boyfriend? She says she's going to marry and wastes her time with other guys when the guy isn't around." "Are you sure you know that for sure?" "I mean the part about the spread?" "No. To be honest, I don't know that personally, but I've heard it from a few guys who said they've had flirtations with her." "You didn't say how you know her." "I'm the guy she was going to marry until I caught her last Thursday with the guy she's standing with now." "Oh boy. Are there going to be fireworks?" "No. She and I broke up on Sunday. Now we're officially toast." "What are the chances I'd have heard from you if Thursday hadn't happened?" "Almost none. But Thursday did happen, and we came here to have a good time, so how about we get on with it?" She took my hand and led me across the room to introduce me to our host. Laura, who had been standing off to the side when we entered, saw me and made a shocked expression on her face. Shocked because she didn't expect to see me at a party like this, or because I caught her with a new boyfriend again, I don't know. I ignored her as Robin led me to a tall man standing with a tall blonde woman. She introduced me to Gary and his wife Artis, and we made small talk for a couple minutes before Robin led me away to get us drinks. The basement had been turned into a rec room and was being used as a dance floor. Robin and I danced and drank. She introduced me to a few people, and I had a great time. Every time I noticed Laura, she looked at me with an expression on her face that I couldn't read. Around 11, Robin said it was time to leave because she had pressing business for Saturday, so we saw our hosts off and said our goodbyes. As I was driving Robin home, she said, "Your ex seems to have spent a lot of time today looking in your direction. Probably surprised to see me there." "No, I got the impression she was uncomfortable seeing you with another girl." "Tough shit. She's the one who made me end our relationship. Maybe, but I don't think she's happy about it. Maybe not, but she'll have to get used to it. Does that mean I'll see you more often, or that you'll start dating all the girls? I prefer to date one girl at a time. I enjoyed your company tonight, and I'm going to ask you out again. As long as you don't turn me down, you'll be my only girl. What if I'm not ready to hang out with one guy all the time? Then you'll say no when I ask, and I'll go find another girl to date. When she says no, I'll call you and see how things are going. If she still says no, I'll find a third girl and repeat this process until I find one that never says no. Well, I like your attitude and I see the possibilities, so maybe we'll give it a try. How about tomorrow night? Sounds good. I walked her to the door, said goodnight, and as I turned to leave, she asked me to wait a minute. I turned back to her and she said, I never kiss on the first date, but I guess there has to be a first time for everything. And she kissed me. I'll see you tomorrow, she said as she left for the house. When I got home, Dad was still awake and told me that Laura had called and that she was upset. I told him it was too late and that I would do it in the morning. Out of habit, I slept late Saturday morning, and when I got up and headed to the kitchen for my first cup of coffee, Mom told me I should call Laura. She's already called twice this morning. Not until I've had my first cup of coffee. Things aren't going well with you two? It's not just the two of us anymore. Does she know about this? She should. She's the one who made the decision. At that moment, the phone rang. My mom answered it and said, It's for you. It's Laura. I picked up the phone and said, Yes? Why didn't you call? It was too late to call when I got home last night, and I just got out of bed this morning. That's not what I meant. I mean, why didn't you call me last night to pick me up for our usual Friday night date? We talked it over last Sunday, Laura. You told me we weren't in an exclusive relationship and had decided to date others. I told you that it was enough that you were dating others. Then I would date you too, and you jumped out of the house. That's not what I meant, Rob. You should have known that. Don't give me that crap, Laura. You were already dating that clown I saw you with last Thursday. I wasn't with him, Rob. I went to that party by myself, and he just happened to be there. Sure, Laura, whatever you say. It doesn't make any difference. I'm starting to hear all sorts of things about you and what you did. Like how you got the nickname Miss Piggy. I don't know what you've heard, Rob, but it's not true. Why wouldn't I believe it's true after I saw you with your buddy at the restaurant? And I won't believe you just happened to meet him at a party. He was standing too close to you and hugging you when I walked into the party. No, Laura, you're not interested in staying with just me, and I'm not interested in being one of many. I'd appreciate it if you'd give me back the ring and the sweater with the letter. I realize it's a little too high school for an adult like you, and it doesn't seem to mean anything to you. I'll see you later. Goodbye. That sounded pretty final, my mom said. She decided that being my constant wasn't enough for her, and like I just said, I'm not interested in standing in line. I started keeping Robin's constant company. While all this was going on, I was getting letters from Jim about every 2 weeks or so, telling me how things were going in his life. He graduated from camp and enrolled in special training. He was assigned to a Navy construction battalion, otherwise known as the Navy SEALs. He learned to build and destroy. He never asked about Annabelle, so when I wrote my response, I didn't mention Annabelle either. I wouldn't have, though. He wouldn't have liked hearing about what she was doing. He wasn't even a week in, and Annabelle was already courting some guy she'd met at a party. A month later, he was gone, and Annabelle started living with a guy she met at work, and another 3 months later, he was gone, and she started living with a black guy she met when he towed her car to the store when it broke down. I don't know for sure, but I heard he made her pull trains for a bunch of her friends at his apartment. And then Annabelle suddenly disappeared, and no one knew where she went. At least until I got a letter from Jim. He had finally finished his training and had been sent to Norfolk as a permanent posting. As soon as he arrived there, he sent for Annabelle and she went to see him. I wish you could come and be my best man, but we didn't have much time to get everything ready. The sooner we get this done, the sooner we can get on the list for housing on base. Poor bastard, I thought. The first time you go, she'll have some other guy between her legs before the sound of the door closing behind you even subsides. I was not short of money as my grandparents had set up a college fund for me the day I was born. It had enough money in it to pay for college and rent an off-campus apartment if I wanted to. So at the beginning of my junior year, Robin and I moved in together, and I began to get a taste of what family life was like. I loved it. After living together for about 6 months, I started thinking about making it permanent. I still had the feeling that what Robin and I had was too good to be true, but Robin gave no signs that she didn't want to continue our relationship. That is, she didn't show any signs until the day I suggested that she go looking for an engagement ring. It was then that she informed me that after graduation, she was going to return to California and marry her childhood sweetheart, who was now in England on a Rhodes Scholarship. He knew all about me and she knew all about the English girl he was living with. We realized that there was no way two healthy young people could go several years without sex, so we agreed to have an open relationship. It shouldn't affect us in any way, Rob, at least not right away. But of course it did affect us, or me. Basically, it came down to the fact that I had just been ripped out of what I thought was a romantic relationship and put into a relationship with a buddy. The problem was that I just didn't like having fun with my friends. I needed more than just sex, and Robin and I gradually drifted apart. 4 months, almost to the day, from the day Robin put an end to my romantic aspirations, she said to me, "You don't want to be here, do you?" I told her I didn't feel comfortable and explained why. "I'm sorry, love. I almost wish I didn't love Alex so much so I could be more of what you want. If it weren't for Alex, you'd be my man." "Thanks, I guess." "So what are we going to do? Flip a coin to determine who stays and who goes." "No need. I knew this day would come and Mom says she hasn't rented out my room yet. She decided it was best to keep it for me, at least until I turn 40 or until she gives her grandchildren. So you're staying and I'm leaving. Friends?" "Always." She hugged me, then asked, "Last night, please?" I'd been home for a week, and on Friday night, as I sat in my room working on an article I was supposed to turn in the following week, my mom called up the stairs. "Rob? There's someone here to see you." I went downstairs and found Mom talking to Laura. Mom looked at me and said, "I'll leave you two alone," and went into the kitchen. "Hi, Rob." "Hi, Laura. How are you doing?" "So-so, but I'm hoping things will get better." "Oh?" "Robin called me and told me you were back on the market and suggested that if I hurry, I could be first in line." "Why would you want to be first in line? Why would you want to be first in line at all?" "There wouldn't be any line if I hadn't been stupid. In fact, Robin would never have existed. I don't want to be in line, Rob. I just want to go back to where I belong." "Where you belong?" She raised her left hand and said, "I never gave you your ring back." She had my class ring on the ring finger of her left hand. "There's a party at Alice Johnson's house tonight. Do you want to take me with you?" At the party, she dangled it at me, and when I mentioned it, she said, "Just so everyone knows I've claimed my rights, baby. I got you back and I'm letting everyone know it." The big surprise came after the party. She was silent as I drove her home. She just sat there looking out the window on the passenger side. When I pulled up to her house, I asked if she wanted to go apartment hunting with me on Saturday. An apartment will be much cheaper in the long run than permanent motels. Is that your way of asking if I want to move in with you? Such a thought has crossed my mind. What time? Around 9. Good. You have a date. Laura and I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment about midway between Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti, and turned the second bedroom into an office, where we put Laura's computer desk and my desk. About a month after we moved in, Jim came home on a 30-day vacation, and he and Annabelle spent a lot of time with Laura and me. Jim and Annabelle seemed to get along great, so maybe I was wrong in my thoughts about her when she left. 3 weeks after Jim returned to duty, Annabelle showed up. Jim had gone to Iraq, and Annabelle decided that she wasn't going to wait for Jim's return to the base. She wasn't home for 2 weeks and lived with the guy she lived with when she went to see Jim in Norfolk. 3 weeks later, she was seen with a black guy she used to date, and rumors started up again about the orgies she was having at his apartment and the train rides she was throwing for his friends. I thought about talking to her, but Laura talked me out of it. She said it was none of our business, and as far as we knew, Jim and Annabelle had an open marriage. I've heard that in the service it's not uncommon for both parties to agree that it's okay to play during a long separation, she said. That doesn't sound like something Jim would agree to. So what are you going to do? Write and tell him? He worships the ground she walks on. He won't thank you for telling him she's a whore. He'll probably end up blaming you for being the one who ruined his life. Leave it to Rob. Jim returned from Afghanistan in time to be best man at my wedding to Laura, and then he and Annabelle went to Norfolk, where he finished the last 9 months of his service. When he was discharged, he and Annabelle returned home, and he found work with a construction company as a heavy equipment operator. The next 2 years flew by, and the Marshalls, Jim and Annabelle, became frequent visitors to our home, and we would see them at least once every 2 weeks or so. Everything seemed to be fine between Jim and Annabelle, and there was no indication that she was cheating on Jim. I figured that was as good an explanation as any, and Laura's theory seemed to hold true when the company Jim worked for bid on and got a job laying a pipeline in Alaska. Conditions on and around the construction site were harsh, so Jim decided to leave Annabelle at home for the 4 months he would be away. Not a week later, Annabelle was seen in a motel room with Gary Mellows, the owner of the company Jim worked for, and after that, Gary's car was seen parked in Jim's driveway almost every night of the week. There were problems with the job in Alaska, and it was extended for another 2 months. Laura and Annabelle were seeing the same doctor, and it just so happened that Laura was in the doctor's office the day Annabelle got the bad news. She was 7 weeks pregnant, and Jim had been gone for a little over 3 months. The way Laura found out was this. 2 nurses who worked at the clinic had studied with us and knew that she knew Annabelle and that she spent a lot of time around Annabelle, and they asked her how she thought Jim would take the news. Patient confidentiality takes a back seat to spreading dirt among friends. And Laura thought for a minute and then said, Jim will never know. If I'm right in my assumptions, Annabelle will have an abortion, and it will all be over before Jim even gets home. It wasn't like that. Someone Laura wouldn't discourage had let Jim know what was going on. Jim flew home, rented a car, and parked on the next street over from his house until he saw Mellows pull up to his driveway, park, and enter the house. He waited 15 minutes to give Gary and Annabelle time to get down to business, and then entered the house with a digital camera at the ready and filmed the lovers in action. 15 minutes later, an ambulance responded to a 911 call, and Mellows was taken to the hospital. The police arrived and were about to take Jim away until he showed them the pictures he had taken. The camera was a Canon Rebel, and Jim had it set to continuous, and the series showed Mellows lunging at Jim. He may have just been trying to get to the camera and take it away from Jim, but given the way the series of shots turned out, Jim could tell that it was obvious he was being attacked and was only defending himself. The cops bought that and left. 20 minutes after the cops left, Annabelle came out on the porch with one suitcase and locked the door behind her. The divorce went off without a hitch, as did the lawsuit filed against Mellows for alienation of affection. He also sued Mellows for some sort of harassment, claiming that Mellows only hired him to send him out of town and then move in with his wife. Mellows could have settled out of court and avoided publicity, but he decided to fight, and as a result, everyone found out what he was doing with the employee's wife after sending him out of town for an extended period of time. The jury ruled in Jim's favor, and he was awarded $1.3 million. After paying court costs and taxes, he was left with a little over $750,000. He paid off the house, put in an in-ground pool, and bought a new Ford F-350. Once the divorce was finalized, Annabelle disappeared from sight, and it was rumored that she had moved out of town. Mellows had to sell some equipment and property to settle the lawsuit, and he lost a lot of business when some customers and potential buyers decided that someone who would do what he did to his employee's wife couldn't be trusted. Jim still had some money left, and he came to me to suggest that I start my own company and take over the business that Mellows had lost. I would do the design and Jim would do the construction. Laura and I talked it over, analyzed our finances, and decided to do it, and R&J Constructors was born as a partnership. We've made it work. Not only did we pick up many of the clients that left Mellows, but we beat him on several jobs, and human nature being what it is, Jim made sure everyone knew when we beat Mellows. The next 5 years flew by. Jim played the field, but never found anyone he wanted to commit to forever. He spent a lot of time with me and Laura, and on average we went out once a week with Jim and his girlfriend. Things were going great. Laura had moved up the ladder in her company, becoming a regional manager and a favorite for the vice president position. I didn't think things could get much better, and unfortunately I was right. It was a Tuesday, and I was just finishing up a lunch meeting with a potential client when Gary Mellows approached me and asked if he could buy me a drink. Personally, I had nothing against Gary. I believe that if a trashy girl like Annabelle offered it to a lonely guy like Gary, you couldn't blame him for accepting the gift. I never believed the story about Gary sending Jim out of town for Annabelle. I always knew Annabelle was a whore, so I figured Annabelle probably did something like go to Gary's office to pick up Jim's paycheck and let Gary know she was lonely because of Jim's absence. Anyway, his problems had to do with Jim, not me, so I took him up on his offer to buy me a drink. As soon as he sat down, he asked, "How's it going?" "Not bad, but it could be better." "Maybe you'll consider selling?" "Selling? Why would I want to do that?" "To make your buddy Jim my partner." "Are you smoking some kind of crap?" "Not really. I don't want to be the one to do it, but take a look at this." He opened his briefcase, pulled out a folder, and held it out to me. I took it, opened it, and was stunned. The first thing I saw in the folder was a picture of Laura and Jim holding hands as they walked into the motel room. There were several more pictures of the two of them entering or leaving the motel room, and a half-dozen more of them in various places, kissing and hugging. I looked up at Gary and he said, "Sorry. I was following him to get something on him, to get back at him. When the private investigator brought me those pictures, I didn't know she was your wife. I knew from the rings on the pictures that she was someone else's, so I put a private investigator on her to find out who she was, so I would have information when I started my revenge." "Why?" "You were guilty." "You did what he said." "No, I didn't." "Yes, I had an affair with his wife, but I never sent him out of town to get to her." She walked into my office, closed the door behind her, and began to undress. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "You sent Jim out of town, so you're going to have to take care of me until he gets back." "I'm single, so I have to say no to Annabelle?" "As far as I'm concerned, this whole mess is Jim's fault initially. Everyone knows Annabelle is a slut, and has been since high school. Jim should have known. He should have known, but he didn't do anything about it. No, Rob, he screwed me with that lawsuit, and I'm going to get it back. I'm just sorry you're in the middle of this. Any idea how long this has been going on?" The private investigator says from what he's been able to find out, it's been at least a year, possibly more. How the hell could it have been going on that long and I didn't find out about it? If she never did anything to make you suspicious, how could you find out? So why do you want to buy me out? What do you gain by becoming Jim's partner? Think about it. As an equal partner, I have an equal say. He says we need to do A, and I say no, we need to do B. No matter what he wants, I will be 180 degrees off. Plus, I'll know what prices we're charging for the work, and I'll make sure the other company charges lower prices. I'll bankrupt the company and Jim will lose his ass. But you will too? Not really. I've checked everything out. If the business fails, we'll sell off the assets and I'll get most of my money back. I won't make any money unless, of course, you count what I make from my other company when I underprice the jobs Jim is bidding on, but I won't lose much either. What if he decides to just stomp on your ass every morning to start your day fresh until you get bored and sell your half to him or someone else? Last time he caught me on top of his wife, and all I could think about was taking the camera away from him. He managed 3 good shots before it dawned on me that I should be defending myself, not worrying about that stupid camera. If he tries that again, he won't have it so easy. In fact, I'm pretty sure I can handle him if it comes to that. So you're interested? Probably, but I want to do a little digging on my own first. If you decide, do you have an approximate amount you'd like to get? I gave him a figure, and he said it might be doable and for me to give him a call if I decide to go for it. I left the meeting with Mellows in disarray. How the hell could Laura and Jim have been doing this behind my back for almost a year, and I hadn't had even the slightest suspicion? I had seen absolutely nothing to indicate that Laura was displeased with me. I saw no loss of affection. Our life was still wonderful, at least it seemed so to me. What had gone wrong? I had no reason to doubt Detective Gary's report and photos, but the photos could have been doctored, and Gary had his own agenda. I wanted to be absolutely sure before taking any action, so I went back to the office, called a friend who worked at an insurance agency, and asked him who they used to investigate suspicious cases. Armed with that information, I called, made an appointment, and 13 days later I had confidence. On Wednesdays, when Jim supposedly traveled to job sites, he was actually meeting Laura at the Comfort Inn on Melrose. How she managed to get time off work for their meetings, I had no idea. All I had to do was decide what to do. I actually knew what I wanted to do, but I had to find a way to make it work. In 2 hours of working with a lawyer, I had a list of what I could and couldn't do, and a list of what I needed to do. We have no fault, so everything will have to be shared equally. I was concerned about her not getting a dime of what I made from the sale of my half of the company. Eventually, I had to admit that the only way to do that was to lie. Even so, she'd still get some of the money. I made a deal with Mellows that I would sell him my share of the company on paper for a third of what he actually paid. That third went into a bank account in my name only. The other 2/3 went into an offshore account I had set up. The deal was that he wouldn't show up at the office or occupy my desk until the morning I handed Laura and Jim the papers. Laura for divorce on grounds of adultery and Jim for alienation of affection. Even though we were in a no-fault state, I could still sue for adultery, and depending on which judge we drew, that could mean a split not 50-50, but slightly better. For the adultery ground to be valid, I needed proof. An analysis of Gary's private investigators' reports and mine showed that every time they were under surveillance, they used the same motel, and it was always on a Wednesday. My detective had rented a room and set it up to record the activities, and a healthy bribe to the porter guaranteed that they would be put in that particular room. Wednesday morning, I called Maria, our receptionist, and asked her to tell Jim that I wouldn't be in that morning because of a dentist appointment. And tell him that if I'm not feeling well after my tooth extraction, I may not even show up in the afternoon. You got it, boss. If I were you, I'd go home and rest. I've never had a tooth pulled that didn't hurt when the effects of the mixing gas wear off. I walked out of the house and back in after Laura left for work. The locksmith was there at 9, changing all the locks in the house. As soon as he was done, I went to the bank and cleaned out the accounts and the safe. My lawyer said to only take half, but my mood was stone cold. Screw you, Laura! And I wasn't going to do anything to make it easy for her. She would get her half eventually, but only after she had to fight for it. I also withdrew the money I thought I was getting from the business. If it was too much, Jim could go to court and try to get the money back, but while I had it, he didn't. My detective called me at 12:10 and informed me that the happy couple had arrived and were in room 128. I drove up, had a few words with the detective, and then sat on the hood of the car parked in front of the suite and waited for them to come out. After the mini confrontation, I got in my car and drove off. As I was pulling away, a man got out of the car, walked over to them, and handed them the papers. Along with the divorce papers, Laura received a temporary restraining order prohibiting her from being within 500 feet of me and the house. To get it, I had to be a little devious. I had to lie and say that a third party had informed me that Jim and Laura had overheard them discussing how much insurance I had and wondering how much my share of the business was worth. There was a hearing pending on whether to make it permanent, but that could take a couple weeks. It was just another way to mess with Laura. The main thing was that she couldn't enter the house without someone from the court present, and I wasn't about to make myself available to make keys for the new locks. Along with Jim's papers for the foreclosure attachment suit was a short note. It read, "You know how these suits work, don't you? How does it feel to be on the other end of one of them?" Driving away from the motel, I called Gary on his cell phone. "Everything's all set. Have a good first day at the office tomorrow." I drove to the airport, parked my car in the long-term parking lot, threw my cell phone in the glove compartment, and boarded the flight to Cabo San Lucas. I spent a week scuba diving and lying on the beach and then flew home. When I turned on my phone, it was flooded with voicemails. Not surprisingly, most of them were from Laura, but there were 4 from Jim as well. You'd think I was the last person he'd want to talk to. No matter, I wasn't interested in talking to him or Laura. Would I want an explanation? Of course I'd want to know why, but I'd made the decision to put those 2 in the past and move on with my life. The reasons for their betrayal were not to occupy my thoughts. My lawyer knew I would be gone for a week, so I decided to call him and let him know I was back. He asked me to call Laura and let her know I was back. She called him twice a day trying to contact me to get into the house and get my things. I was on the verge of telling him to call her and make arrangements with the court to let her into the house under supervision when a thought struck me. Another way to mess with her. I called her and asked her what she needed. I need to get my clothes and other things, but I can't even get into the house with someone from the court because I don't have a key, and the court people won't let me break in. You don't have anything there to take away. I gave everything to Goodwill. I don't want anything of yours in the house to remind me of your lying, cheating ass. There's nothing of yours here anymore, not even a stray hair clip. Damn it, Rob, you had no right to do that. I had as much right to do it as you had to stab me in the back. We need to talk, Rob. It's not what you think. Be honest, Laura. I don't think you were having fun with Jim. I know that for a fact. Goodbye, Laura. I hung up the phone. All of her stuff was still in the house, but then again, I wanted to mess with her. Eventually, she would get her stuff, but it wouldn't be soon. I had always been on good terms with Maria, who was our receptionist, secretary, bookkeeper, head cook, and bottle washer, so I called her and asked her how things were going. Not bad for me, but not so good for the company. Nothing is working out. Gary and Jim fight all the time over the most insignificant little things. Jim says to do something, and Gary replies that he doesn't need to do it. Jim calls and orders something, and as soon as Jim leaves the office, Gary calls and cancels the order. We have work that needs to be started, but it just stands there while Jim and Gary take care of it. I'm so sick of it that I tendered my resignation last Friday, but Gary said he'd double my salary if I stayed, so naturally I'm not going to leave. They had a fist fight on Thursday, but there was no winner in it, although Jim did get a broken nose. Why did you leave us? Why did you sell out to Gary? I told her the whole story. She was quiet for a minute, and then she said, Now I have another reason to stay. And what's that? I can help Gary. I never liked Jim. He was always hitting on me even though he knew I was engaged. He even hinted once that he'd let me go if I didn't go on a date with him, and we both know what he meant when he said go on a date. I asked him what you'd say about him letting me go, and that shut him up. You should have told me. Why? It was a personal problem and I dealt with it. I'm sorry for you and Laura Robb, but there may be a silver lining to it, at least for me. How's that? It means you're back on the market. How do you feel about being hunted? I thought you were engaged. I was until I caught that asshole doing to me what he did to you, Laura. When did that happen? About 3 weeks ago. Well, honey, if you're worth it, I'll put your name at the top of the list when I start dating again. But that won't be for a while. I'm not going to give Laura anything she can use against me. I can wait, but keep me in mind if you get lonely and want some company for dinner. I will, sweetie, and thank you. My phone rang 16 times that day. 14 from Laura and 2 from Jim. I couldn't think of anything that Jerk could say that I would want to hear. And if he was calling to ask for something, it certainly wasn't from me. I deleted all the calls and headed home. Cooked myself dinner, and then out of a whim, I called Gary Mellows and asked how his plan was working. Not bad at all. I made sure I was sitting at your desk when he got to work. He saw me and frowned, and then asked what the hell I was doing in the office and sitting at your desk. I laughed and told him I was his new partner. The look on his face was priceless. You could almost see the steam coming out of his ears as he read a copy of our agreement. I gave us a proper start almost immediately. He called for a fuel truck because the front-end loader and other equipment at Wilkins' site had run out of diesel fuel. As soon as he left the office, I called and canceled the order. One of the loaders ran out of fuel, and Jim called Allied and berated them, and they told him that I canceled the order and that they had to put up with that kind of crap from him and to get fuel from someone else. That's when he came up to me and asked what the hell I was doing. I told him that Allied was charging us too much and that I was looking for a better price, and it went downhill from there. A little birdie told me you two got into a fist fight. Yes. It all ended last Thursday. And what came out of it? I guess I was a little optimistic when I told you I thought I could take him, but I got over it and hurt him. Well, carry on and good luck with your plan. Hanging up the phone, I went to the room I had converted to an office, turned on my computer and started typing up my resume. I would begin my job search the next day. I was just typing on the keyboard when the doorbell rang. I opened the door and saw Jim standing there. What the hell do you want? We need to talk, Rob. No, you don't, asshole. It's not my fault, Rob. She came after me. She caught me when I was in a really bad mood because of what Annabelle did to me. I wasn't thinking straight, Rob. I'm sorry, Rob, but it wasn't my fault. I didn't pursue her. But you knew she was my wife. You knew how you felt when you found out about Annabelle, and you didn't even stop for a second to think you'd make me feel the same way, did you? You had to know I'd find out sooner or later, and probably the same way you found out about Annabelle. Someone told you. Well, asshole, somebody told me. You're a douchebag as far as I'm concerned. You're supposed to be my friend, and even if I believe Laura made a move on you, which I don't, you should have turned your back on her the same way I turned my back on Annabelle when she made a move on me. You knew you were better off, but you did it anyway. And even if it's true that she made a move and caught you when you weren't thinking straight, that doesn't justify the second, third, fourth, and however many times after that. No, you stuck a knife in my back and there's no avoiding it. Why did you load me up with mellows? Because in the mood I was in when I found out, and the rage I felt, if I'd come after you, I probably would have had things differently, and you're not worth going to jail over. Besides, sticking mellows in will cause you grief that will last far longer than the aftermath of any beating. But you know what? The rage I felt at the time is gone. And that's when I hit him. I grabbed him by his shirt, dragged him into the house, slammed the door behind me, and stomped the hell out of him. He was unconscious when I dragged him out of the house and shoved him into the car. You wouldn't believe the smile I had when I got back in the house. I might have the police coming to see me, but I wasn't worried about that. All I had to do was say he attacked me and I defended myself, refer to his fight with Mellows and say he's mad at me because I sold my half of the business to Mellows and he's trying to make me pay for it. The next morning, I sent out 14 resumes and then called my attorney to see how things were going. He informed me that there would be a hearing on the temporary restraining order this coming Monday, but he had not received any communication from Laura or the attorney on her behalf. I contemplated calling Laura but decided against it. The more time that passed before she hired an attorney, the more time that would pass before I had to communicate anything to her. Over the course of the week, I received several responses to the resumes I had sent out and flew to Atlanta for an interview on Wednesday and ended up in Baltimore on Thursday. I liked both interviews, but I also heard back from a company in San Diego and thought I might just like living in a place where it's almost always warm, so I called and scheduled an interview for the following Tuesday. On Monday, there was a hearing on the temporary restraining order, and to everyone's surprise, the judge found no reason to uphold it, and I was ordered to allow Laura access to the house. Laura, of course, was at the hearing, and she had an attorney with her. She came over to me and started to say something. I stepped away from her and got my lawyer, and then came back to her. You don't say anything to me until my attorney is present. I just wanted to tell you I'm coming tonight. No, you won't. I'm flying out for a job interview at 2:30 and won't be home until Wednesday. You can come by anytime after 6. Her lawyer started to say something, but I interrupted him. She will not, I repeat, will not be in this house unless I keep an eye on everything she does. There will be someone from the court there to keep an eye on things, and you can also have someone from your attorney there. No. That won't work? They won't have a clue about what she's allowing herself. All they'll do is make a list, and if it's something she shouldn't have taken, I'll have to fight to get it back. She was out of the house for 2 weeks and she survived. Another 48 hours won't destroy her. Her lawyer shook his head negatively and said, Then I guess we'll have to see what the judge has to say, and turned to go back to the court clerk, but Laura stopped him. Just drop it, she said. I can wait another 48 hours. I looked at her and said, Wednesday at 6, and turned to leave. Hold on a second, Rob. Can we talk then? No, I said and walked out of the building. I thought the interview in San Diego had gone well and headed home, hoping to hear from them. Laura arrived at 6 with someone from her attorney's office. The woman from the courthouse arrived at 26, and we spent those 20 minutes drinking coffee and talking. She told me that her job was to observe for the court and take an inventory of the items seized. She would also make a list of the items in dispute, but I told her that wasn't necessary. She can have whatever she wants. If you feel that way, why did you take such a hard stance against her? She stabbed me in the back, and she did it to someone who had been my best friend for over 25 years. I couldn't beat her up and destroy her, at least not if I wanted to avoid jail, but I had to do something to get back at her and make her suffer. It wasn't much, but at least it was something. Just then the doorbell rang. I let Laura and the man who was with her from the lawyer's office in and went outside to cut the grass. When I finished and came back into the house, everyone was gone except Laura, and she was sitting at the kitchen table sipping tea. She looked up at me when I walked in. You lied to me. You didn't give any of my stuff to Goodwill. Maybe not, but I sure as hell liked the way you resented you when you said I had no right to do that. I didn't expect this to turn out to be all hers, and it's going to take me longer to figure it out than I expected. I pulled my keyring out of my pocket, removed my house key from it, and held it out to her across the table. Don't bother moving. You can pick up the house on Friday. I'll have all my stuff out of here by then. Why? I'm interviewing and I'm going out of state as soon as I get a job. I mean, why did you do what you did if you were just going to give me the house and leave? Why the restraining order and the lies about giving away my stuff? That's a stupid question. After what you did to me, I had to do something to get back at you. Just be thankful that I decided to do it peacefully instead of violently. Just because I went down on you doesn't even come close to making us even, but it's the best thing I could have done without going to jail. I know you said no when I asked if we could talk tonight, but I'm still going to try to convince you that we don't need to divorce. Be serious, Laura. There's no way in hell we can stay together after what you've done. But that doesn't mean anything, Rob. I love you and you know it. What happened with Jim was a mistake, just a stupid mistake. I like Jim. I've always liked him, but I don't love him, and I never have. I don't care if you loved him or not. You still had fun with him, and whether you loved him or not, it was still infidelity, and you shouldn't have any doubts about how I feel about that. All you have to do is remember how upset I was about what Annabelle was doing with Jim. I was so upset that I was going to tell him about it, but I let you talk me out of it. That should have told you how I would feel about you doing that to me, and don't give me crap like I didn't want you to find out. Cheaters always get caught. They always get caught sooner or later. Jim found out about Annabelle because someone saw her having fun with him and told him. That's the same way you got caught. Someone saw you and Jim go into the motel room and told me. Doesn't it matter that I love you? No, Laura, it doesn't, because it wasn't enough to keep you from cheating on me. But it didn't mean anything, Rob. Honestly, it meant nothing. It was an accident. An accident? How could sex with the man who used to be my best friend be an accident? He stopped by our house when you were on a trip to Santa Fe, and he was in a bad mood about Annabelle. He really loved her, and despite cutting her out of his life, he missed her. We had a drink, and after a while he started crying, and I took him in my arms and hugged him and tried to comfort him. I remember thinking, this is so wrong. I shouldn't be doing this, but I feel so good. But I'll be honest, deceive felt really good. The next time you went out of town, Jim stopped by, and we both knew what he was there for, and we got back into it. There was no love involved, Rob. As corny as it sounds, it was just sex, Rob. Just a little excitement in my life. I never once neglected you while all of this was going on. I love you, Rob. I really do, and you know it. We can work through this. We don't need to get divorced. We has nothing to do with it, Laura. I need a divorce. I can't live with a man who betrayed me. It's simple, Laura. You betrayed me. If I left you, I'd be watching you like a hawk for the rest of my life, waiting for you to do it again. By your own admission, you kept doing it because you enjoyed the cheating so much. You can promise me all you want that you'll never do it again, but your promises aren't worth a spit. You already promised me to leave everyone else behind when we got married, and you broke that promise. I can't believe anything you say, Laura. Jim's story of how it happened isn't even close to yours. According to Jim, it didn't happen by accident. According to him, you were playing a game with him. He could be lying, or you could be. The problem is, after what you both did, neither of you is trustworthy as far as I'm concerned, so I can't prefer one story over the other. The bottom line, Laura, is that we've broken up as a couple. I'm not giving up, Rob. I'm going to fight for the divorce. I know we'll get through this because we love each other. You're mad at me right now, and justifiably so, but I can make a promise to you and keep that promise, especially now that I see what breaking that promise could cost me. My lawyer says he can get the court to order counseling, and I know that can help. I love you, Rob, and I'm not letting you go. You can't seem to understand that I don't want you right now. Okay, I'll admit that I still love you, and it'll take me a while to get over it, but there's no way in hell I can live with you again. Every time I go to bed with you, I'm going to think about you being with that jerk who was my best friend, and I can't live like that. You won't fight for a divorce from Laura because if you do, I will release the videotape of your last meeting with Jim. Every family member, every friend, and all your coworkers will get a copy. I will create your own porn site for you, and there are dozens of amateur porn sites where I can post it, and I will do it with your full name and address. It'll make your life very interesting. Bullshit, Rob. No such video exists? Oh no? Wait here. I went to the den where I had my briefcase, pulled out a copy of the disc, went back to the kitchen, and handed it to her. Take a look at it. After you watch it, decide if you want someone else to watch it. Now, if you don't mind, there's something I need to do. You can pick up the house on Friday, but for now you have to go. On Thursday and Friday, I moved out of the house and put most of my stuff in storage. Then I rented a room at the executive suites for a month, counting on having a job by the end of it. Over the next 2 weeks, I traveled to Salt Lake City, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Chicago, and Detroit for interviews, all of which I was happy with, but I didn't hear back from any of them. I sat down at my desk, figured out my finances, and decided I could live without a job for about 6 years, and started checking out other cities and states looking for places with a lower cost of living. A cost of living that would allow me to stretch those 6 years to 8, maybe 10. Laura signed the divorce papers and returned them to my attorney. I almost regretted that she had done that. I would have loved to have a CD of her and Jim scattered all over the house, but a deal is a deal. I made an agreement. The agreement called for a 50-50 division of the property, with each party paying their own attorney fees. I was the only one who filed the suit, so I paid the legal fees. Laura said she wanted the house, and my half of the equity was a little more than the amount I had borrowed from the bank, so that was fine. True, I had to give Laura half of what I got from selling my half of the company, but I knew that would be the case and had made provision for it. She did swear that I sold out too cheaply, but it didn't matter because the other 2/3 of what I got from the sale was safely tucked away. An interesting thing came to me through the grapevine. It seems that as soon as I got myself out of sight, Jim started stalking Laura and was so persistent that she had to take out a restraining order on him. Not that I cared, of course, but I laughed about it. I decided to wait until the divorce was final before taking any steps. I finally started getting calls from some of the companies I was interviewing with. A company in San Diego called and asked me to come back and talk to them, but before I could call and arrange it, I got a call from Gary Mellows. How would you like your company back? Why would I want my company back? I sold it to you so I could go back to Jim and get away from him. Why would I want to become his partner again? You wouldn't want to, but then you don't have to. After our last fight, I said, if you're so damn unhappy with me as a partner, I'll buy you out or sell your half to someone else. He thought about it for about 30 seconds and then asked me how much I'd give for his half. He took half of what I gave you. And yet the question is, why should I want her back? If you've done even half of what you told me you were going to do to set Jim up, the company probably isn't worth that much anymore. You might be surprised. Come to the office and let's talk. I didn't think I had anything to lose, so I went to talk to him. When I walked in the door, Maria jumped up from her desk and hugged me, then poked her head through the office door and told Gary I had come. As you know, I only bought you out to screw Marshall. I didn't really need or use him. But things are changing. I'm getting more and more into the construction part of the business. I want to move away from the engineering aspect. On the one hand, I couldn't get what I wanted in terms of engineers, so I started thinking about what to do. The solution that came to my mind was to call you and ask you to set up a company that I would contract with to do the engineering work. But then Marshall sold me the company, and I thought, why not just sell you the company and contract with you? I can't afford to buy out my half and Jim's half. You won't have to pay that much because the company isn't worth that much anymore. Since I own the whole bunch, I've transferred all the construction work and construction equipment to my other company. All I'm leaving is purely the engineering part. I'll sell you the company for the amount I paid Jim and sign a 5-year contract for engineering services. Plus, the company still has contracts with about 15 other firms. I don't see how you can lose. How much did you give Jim? He told me, and it was less than I had in my offshore account. But there is one condition. And what's that? I have no secrets from Maria, and I voiced the idea to her. She said that if you agree, she will stay with you and not move to my company. If you agree to the deal, you will stay with her. I didn't have to think long, and I told him that I would agree to the deal, but to back me up, I wouldn't do it until my divorce was finalized. which wouldn't be for another 3 weeks at the earliest. Gary said that was fine with him, and we agreed to the deal. As I was leaving the office, Maria said, "I heard. Don't forget that at the end of those 3 weeks, you promised that I would be first on the list." I didn't think you were serious about that. You can rest assured I am, she said with a 1,000-watt smile. As I pulled away from the curb, my cell phone rang, and it was my lawyer. Jim had learned his lesson from what happened to Gary when Gary sued Jim and had called my lawyer with an offer to settle the case. I told the lawyer to take it. I made it the rest of the way to my room at the executive suites with a huge smile on my face. In 3 weeks, I could start a new life, with a new job, a new girlfriend, and money in the bank. I could have spent those 3 weeks looking for a place to live and shopping for furniture. Who says nice guys always finish last? Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.